Looking back, I remember how all my family's summer barbecues went the same way. There'd be the initial bustle of uncles and aunts arriving with kids, clinking paper bags full of liquor and lopsided foil trays of macaroni and lasagna. First, drinks were poured, meat was thrown on the grill, and cackles followed light gossip in the crowded kitchen. We ate, parents drank, and as the afternoon progressed, all of the cousins overcame their shyness and darted around the open backyard. The older crowd took up residence in plastic-woven chairs with cups in hand. As they ventured deeper down into their drinks, so too did the light chatter from earlier in the afternoon, descending into more serious subjects. It wasn't until I had reached 11 or 12 years old that I began to recognize the reoccurrence of the name Carrie May, uttered from the semicircle of elders across the lawn. I asked my mom about who she was while driving home from a barbecue one afternoon. She said, "I'll tell you when you're older." I'm 15 now, and the grown-ups still fall into whispers when I pass by their drinking circle if Carrie May is the topic of conversation. Little do they know that I have done quite a bit of sleuthing on my own, through equal parts hearsay, courtesy of older cousins, and eavesdropping. I've since managed to piece together a general account of what happened to my distant cousin Carrie May and her family. After the fact, I can understand why my mother and all the other grown-ups chose to keep her story away from us kids. It's to this day the scariest thing I have ever, or never, heard. It happened in a little town in the North Shore of Massachusetts called Middleton, where Carrie May and her parents, my aunt and uncle, lived. Middleton was still pretty undeveloped in the mid-'80s. Young couples looking to start a family often opted for the paved and well-lit streets of neighboring Danvers or Salem over the pocked dirt roads of Middleton. But my Uncle Steve and Aunt Lena, Carrie May's parents, were known for being somewhat bohemian. They were both painters who relished in the unfettered wilderness that the small wooded town had to offer. The family fit in well there. Carrie May grew up surrounded by the likes of artists, painters, and eccentrics who called that small stretch of forest home. On the evening that Carrie May went missing, her family was visiting a public patch of garden rented by one of her father's friends. This particular field was divided into dozens of small plots where the town's citizens could grow anything from cucumbers to black-eyed Susans. Their friend's plot bordered the forest surrounding the field. While the parents sat in rickety chairs among the watermelons, the kids darted in and out of the trees and played hide-and-seek. At one point in the evening, the other kids in the group came back to their parents saying that they couldn't find Carrie May. They'd been playing a game of hide-and-seek, and even though the game had been over for 20 minutes, Carrie May was still nowhere to be seen. At first, my aunt and uncle weren't that alarmed. They yelled her name from where they sat, expecting her to come running from the woods once she heard the voices. Carrie May was a playful and imaginative girl, but she was always well-behaved. That's why my Uncle Stephen and Aunt Lena started to get worried after only a few minutes of getting no answer from their calls into the woods. As the sun began to set, flashlights were retrieved from cars, and the grown-ups in the group fanned out into the surrounding woods to search for Carrie May. They called her name until 9 o'clock or so. After that, they called the cops. Days went by. Weeks. All the while, police officers and volunteers from Middleton and neighboring towns combed the woods, going miles into the New England forest. Yet despite the fervor of the search, not so much as a shoelace was recovered. After 1 month of flyers, false tips, and whirs of helicopter blades and television appearances, my aunt and uncle first began to consider the possibility that they would never see Carrie May again. But then, something extraordinary happened. Contrary to all statistics for missing children, kidnappings, and the rule of the first 48 hours. Carrie May was found. Or, more accurately, she just showed up. One day, roughly 5 weeks after her disappearance, she emerged, naked, bruised, and scratched from the woods at the exact spot that she had entered from. No one was at the gardening plot at the time, as it was 5 o'clock in the morning. She walked barefoot across the misty field and down the country road into town. Angus MacLeod, a fry cook at N&J Donuts, was the first one to spot her. He called the police, who picked her up and brought her to the station. By 7:30, there had been a tearful reunion between Carrie May, Uncle Stephen, and Aunt Lena. By 9, the news of Carrie May's return had trickled through the neighborhood and was spilling over into the neighboring towns. 12 o'clock saw the long driveway to their home jammed with vans from every newspaper and television station on the North Shore, and by dinner time, all of Essex County was in celebration for the darling 13-year-old who had finally come home. "It was like a bad dream," Aunt Lena whimpered into a Channel 5 microphone. "A bad dream that I couldn't wake up from, but today I woke up." And so it seemed to that small pocket of Massachusetts in the dog days of 1985, like some great nightmare had hovered for a spell over their town only to move on, saving its worst for another time in another place. The story of Carrie May was not so simple and joyous as all the headlines and news anchors led the country's residents to believe, however. While vast coverage was devoted to Carrie May's initial reappearance, virtually no attention was given to the events which ensued weeks later, after all the fanfare had died down. By the time Carrie May had countless interviews with investigators and child psychiatrists regarding her disappearance, each of these efforts to discover what actually happened was discouraged, however, by Carrie May's persistent reply, "I don't remember anything." Making no headway, the professionals backed off but encouraged my Aunt Lena and Uncle Stephen to monitor Carrie May carefully for any unusual behavior. Yeah, was their typical bohemian reply. They were just happy to have their daughter back. Carrie May was home. What was there to worry about? And indeed, for the first few weeks after Carrie May's return, there did seem to be little need for concern. Back at home, in her own room, Carrie May quickly slid back into the old grooves of life as usual. She strung and beaded another dream catcher, feverishly chopped up fashion magazines for a new collage, played Carole King's Tapestry until the needle was shot, and ate tomato and mayonnaise sandwiches by the stack, with a side of cherry coke, of course. My Uncle Stephen hired a few extra hands at his house painting company so that he could take some time off. The three of them made a trip up to Kenobi Lake Park, where Carrie May rode the Cannonball roller coaster a total of 8 times in 2 hours, breaking her own record. Within a 2-week period, they ate lobster rolls and French fries at the Clam Box 3 times, and they caught so many fireflies in the evenings that Aunt Lena guessed they could light Fenway Park with them. It truly seemed that life had returned to normal for the small family. Unfortunately, for Carrie May, Uncle Stephen, and Aunt Lena, those 2 happy weeks would prove to be no more than the eye of the storm. Something truly sinister lay on the horizon, and it came for a visit about 3 weeks after Carrie May's return. On the night it happened, Carrie May woke her parents up, saying that she couldn't sleep because of a noise in her bedroom. When asked what it sounded like, she said it was a sort of rubbing or grinding. My aunt and uncle went to her room, switching on the light, checking the corners and closet. They listened, too, but after a minute of hearing and seeing nothing out of the ordinary, they told Carrie May that she could sleep with them that night. They'd take a closer look at things in the morning. So all 3 of them went to bed and were soon asleep. In the very early morning, my Aunt Lena woke up to go to the bathroom. It was down the hall on the left, just past Carrie Mae's room, and after using the toilet, she was passing Carrie Mae's room when something caught her eye at the window. From the door, she could see Carrie Mae's window, which was open, as it had been earlier that night. Nothing unusual there. What was unusual, what made my aunt's blood suddenly run cold, was the flap of torn screen hanging down into the room. Slowly, she padded past the threshold, across the floorboards over to the window. Reaching down and picking up the flap of screen, she noticed that the edges were gnarled and frayed, as if it had been sawed through with a blunt instrument. With a chill, she realized that this was the sound that Carrie Mae had heard, the cutting of the screen. As she examined it, she suddenly noticed something long and dark lying on the floor beneath the window. Picking it up, she noted its lightness, how it was smooth on one side but curled and grimy on the other. One end of it was jagged, as if it had broken off of something. The other was a fine point, with a sharp edge running down one side. A bone, she thought. Looking back and forth from the object to the window screen, she had felt the material before, felt it every day of her life. No, not a bone. It was then that she came to the sickening realization of what had been used to open the screen that she heard it. A wet, guttural growl. She turned quickly to her left, expecting to find an animal. What she saw instead made the room spin. There in the corner, lit partially by moonlight, stood a woman. But not just any woman. It was the most horrifying creature, animal or man, she had ever seen. The mere sight of it made her sick with revulsion and terror. It was completely emaciated. The filthy floral dress hung loosely from the shoulders. Its neck barely looked able to support the large head covered by a great, wild, and greasy nest of black hair. Strands shot in rays all around its skeletal face. Its wide, pale eyes, hid back in two caves within the skull, looked drugged, frantic, desperate, and even a bit mirthful. They hung above a thin, carved sliver of a mouth, which seemed both to smirk and scowl, revealing flashes of black, rotten teeth. Bloody scratches and splotches of mud, dirt, and filth speckled its twig-like arms. It had no shoes on. Both feet were black with earth and brown claw-like toenails dug into the floor where it stood. The nails on its hands were easily the length of the fingers from which they grew. In a fitting observation, they reminded Aunt Lena of the sloths she had once seen at the zoo. 9 great black curls hung from the 10 grimy fingers. The 10th, of course, Aunt Lena held in her own hand. It had belonged to the left index. Upon seeing the cracked stump where it had once been, she dropped it to the floor. The thing raised its right arm and pointed a dagger nail at Carrie Mae's empty bed. It growled again, only this time Aunt Lena realized it wasn't a growl at all. It was a word. Girl, where's the girl? As it spoke, drool dribbled from its cracked lips, from between jagged black teeth. Strings of it glistened in the moonlight and pooled onto the ends of its massive toenails. Some of it hung from the dark, slender chin before stringing down onto the front of its dress. While watching the spittle roll down past the bumps of its tiny breasts, Aunt Lena came to another horrifying realization. She had seen that pattern before. Purple flower, yellow flower, purple flower, yellow flower. TJ Maxx back-to-school sale. Dear God, I bought that dress. That's Carrie Mae's dress! The thing lurched forward now with something clutched in its left hand. Something that had been hidden in the darkness. A sack. A giant, coarse, ancient-looking burlap sack with its wide, dark mouth gaping open, and the creature clicked forward on its gnarled toenails, the great sack hissing across the floorboards at its side. As it advanced, the mouth tightened from a bitter scowl into a wide black grin, a grin denoting an epiphany. "You'll do," it gargled, and practically giggled as it motioned with its free hand toward the open sack. Get in, get in, get in." Its eyes went wide, wider than any eyes Aunt Lena had seen before, its wet black mouth open and shut in a gnashing grin as it began to make clumsy swipes at my aunt with its right hand. "You'll do, get in," it barked, all in one garbled word. "You'll do, get in." At this point, Aunt Lena found her vocal cords, which, up until that point, had been stifled with pure terror. Her survival instincts loosened the screams that had been mounted in her throat since seeing that flap of torn screen. She screamed with all the delirium and abandon of a creature caught in the claws of death. Backed up against the wall behind her, she quickly scuttled sideways towards the doorway and dashed, screeching down the hall towards her bedroom. My Uncle Stephen was already out of bed. He followed my aunt's shaking finger back towards Carrie Mae's bedroom, only now to find gauzy curtains fluttering in the wind. At the window, he could just make out a thin, dark form retreating to the forest's edge. Dawn saw many of the same officers who had calmed and questioned Carrie Mae 3 weeks before, combing the property. Kicking through tall grass and brush with flashlights, not far from where Uncle Stephen had seen it enter the woods. Officers found what looked like a rudimentary campsite. The bones and viscera of squirrels sat in a pile by a leaf pine needle mattress. A dugout latrine sat 10 paces from the bed, and under a log, near the squirrel remains, officers recovered soggy, moldering newspapers chronicling the return of Carrie Mae. The entire site had a direct view of Carrie Mae's bedroom window. It was quickly surmised by everyone at the scene that the woman had camped out in the woods near the house for some time before attempting to abduct Carrie Mae. Maybe a week, maybe more. Police obtained a sketch of the woman based off of my Aunt Lena's account of that night. It was distributed throughout the county's police departments. The sketch was also used in one final interview with Carrie Mae following the incident at the house. Carrie Mae, who had been surprisingly calm during the whole event, took one look at the sketch of the woman and began to shake uncontrollably. She had a fit, bordering on epileptic, where in the office of the Middleton police chief, while screaming, she attempted to rip off her own skin with her fingernails, screeching, "Like this." She did it like this. A team of psychiatrists later theorized that Carrie Mae's previous abduction had been so traumatic that she had repressed it, leaving no conscious memory of her time in the woods. Upon seeing a portrait of her abductor, however, those memories all came rushing back, overloading her conscious mind, frying it with madness. She left the police department that day on a stretcher, her hands and feet bound by leather straps. Rumor has it that she began to laugh uncontrollably in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. She's lived at McLean Psychiatric Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts ever since. The North Shore Snatcher, as she came to be called in the local folklore, was never found. It's 2016 now, and for all I know, she's dead. Or perhaps she's moved on to woods in some other county, some other state. Who knows? The truth is, she doesn't even need to be alive or present to exist. Like something as traumatic as a shark attack or a plane crash, The memory of what happened to Carrie Mae and her family echoes down the years, so that even decades later, the fear remains fresh. So odd and disturbing was the event that the old folks are still left glued to their chairs at summer barbecues, brooding over their drinks and trying to piece it all together. All the while, they keep a watchful eye on that border where the lawn ends and the woods begin. Occasionally, a young cousin will dash in amongst the trees, only to hear behind them, "Hey, get out of there!" from their parents. "You don't know what's in there!" The little culprit will emerge from the bushes, stomping its feet in protest and whining, "Why not? There's no poison ivy around here." But by that point, the parents looking past the child, into the gloom beyond the birches. More to themselves than anyone else. They'll mutter, "It ain't poison ivy I'm worried about." To those who sleep. This happened a few years ago. You may have heard rumors if you're on campus. Some even circulated online. Nobody knew what really happened because, well, I'm the only one who knows. And I keep quiet for a multitude of reasons. None of them matter now. Here's what really happened. The four of us were handpicked in this experiment by Professor Richardson because we'd all studied under him, worked under him, and, as much as anyone can, earned his confidence. He said this one was different. They had to keep it quiet. He wanted to keep details to a minimum. All he would tell us before going in was that he required a month of our lives, and that if he succeeded, sleep would never again be necessary. "Think of it," he said. 6 to 8 additional hours every day. Your month will be paid back before the year is out. If he was right, he'd have a Nobel Prize for sure. It would change the world. We believed in him. Sleep would become a hobby. Imagine that. We felt lucky to be a part of it. We went in with the highest of hopes. We were so excited for a new future for humanity and for ourselves. I was the only one to leave that place. Week 1. Professor Richardson brought us out to the location in his van, explaining along the way what we were to do. For the purposes of the study, we were asked to remain in the compound, as he called it. We'd be locked in fact, and deprived of windows and Wi-Fi. Other than endure patiently, we didn't have to do much of anything. "My machine does all the work," he explained. "It uses a complex mix of sound waves to disrupt the process of sleep, evolutionary appendices from the days before civilization. The most immediate side effect you'll notice is that you won't dream. And any other effects we noticed, we were to catalog. We were, as he said, in uncharted territory, and so we had to map out the dangers." The immensity of the project was inspiring enough. Then we saw the compound. The Octagon, as it was known. A concrete octagonal structure built at the end of a labyrinth of dirt roads, somewhere in the backwoods of Searcy, Arkansas. I've never been able to find it again. The prof said it was originally intended as a jail for terrorists, but it was abandoned and never used. It's virtually impenetrable, invisible to satellites, but for us, it had been stocked with all the comforts we'd require for a month of dedication. I don't know if any of us expected to really conquer sleep. We thought perhaps a reduction in sleep requirements could be possible. We spent a fair amount of the first 2 days speculating on how the machine works with its complex mix of sound waves, and whether sleep really is an evolutionary appendix, as the professor had claimed. By the third day of only getting 3 to 4 hours of sleep, contrary to feeling groggy, we were more awake and full of energy than ever. We were alert, ready to debate these ideas. That's when the excitement really hit us. "He really did it," JT said. JT was a big, ginger-bearded guy, the sort of guy who still has a healthy collection of magic cards. "We don't know that," James said, always the skeptic. He came from Australia just to study under Richardson. "The machine could be stimulating the adrenal glands to mildly dose us with adrenaline all throughout the day." "Even were that so, it wouldn't change the fact that he beat sleep," I said. "With our extra time, we were getting tons of reading, played a stupid amount of Call of Duty, and still had plenty of time to sit around and debate. Guess I just have to admit it's fucking amazing," James said. We all felt it. It was almost euphoric. The excitement we felt for being possibly the first humans to live without the need for sleep. Technically, we still needed a few hours each night still, but we decided together that it was more out of habit than necessity. But then, on the 4th day, Don said, "There's something wrong." Don was a serious one. Super serious. He used to be a Franciscan, I'd heard. It showed. He didn't talk that much, and when he did, it's usually worth listening to. This time he put into words something I'd been feeling, but I guess just kinda buried under the excitement. For the experiment, or... I don't know, he said. "It's a feeling. This constant uneasiness, like this isn't going the way it's supposed to be going, or that we're in the wrong place." No, James said. "I think that's it. It's this place. We all knew it was weird when we first saw it, this concrete octagon, but living in it, I think there's something wrong with this place, like something terrible happened here." "I understood it was never used," I said. "Governments always say that about torture prisons," James said. "It's more than that," JT said. "I feel it too. I thought it was just from lacking windows at first, but that's not it. I think it's the angle. It's like the angles in this building don't add up to what they should." "What if everyone's dead outside?" Don asked. James jumped up so fast his chair clattered to the ground. "Cut that shit out, Don. Why would you even say that?" "Well, what are you saying?" I asked. "This is a haunted octagon?" "Yeah, James," JT said. "Was it built on an octagonal Indian burial ground?" "Okay, you want to play that?" he said. "I can play. Look. The space around us transforms based on how we perceive it. Take a church. The people who go there perceive it as holy. So, they do things, like leave their crutches behind when they force themselves to walk, or light their candles or whatever. These changes to the space only enhance the perception of holiness and influence future visitors to perceive it in the same way and change it in the same way. Haunted places are the same. For one reason or another, they begin to be perceived as haunted. The more they're perceived that way, the more they're imbued with hauntedness. Even if you've never seen the place before, you pick up on the subtle clues if you're at all sensitive. In a way, it's true to say it's a haunted place. It's true to say the church is holy. Our interactions with that space has made it something more than just wood and sheetrock or whatever. So what I'm saying is, maybe something's happened here and we're picking up on it. Some bloody awful things. And in that sense, yeah, it's a haunted octagon. No, Don said. Places are considered holy because an authority telegraphs it to whoever will listen, just like haunted places make a lot of money off dumb tourists. Whatever it is, I said, we all agree something isn't feeling right about our situation. Maybe it's the machine. I say we write it down as a side effect. On that point, at least, we were all able to agree. It didn't put any of our uneasiness at rest, but we wrote it down. We somehow agreed upon the phrasing right away, too. Acute sensation that we've entered into something where we aren't welcome. week 2. We tried our best to ignore these feelings and carry on like we had been doing. Those first few days had been some of the best in our adult lives, but we never got back to those happy times. I realized about then how short-sighted of Richardson it had been to leave us there without any means of contacting the outside world. When I voiced that opinion, "It's just what I've been thinking," JT said. "Richardson isn't a dumb guy, you get me? I think he did this on purpose." "Why would he do that?" I asked. "For science, of course," he answered. "It's one of those meta-studies. We're told it's about one thing, but it's actually about how we react to the experiment. The Milgram's experiments. Or it's not his choice," James said. "The government's making him do it, and that machine is designed to control us or some sort of cults, Scientologists." "This is a government-built institution," JT said. "That actually makes sense. Not the Scientology part, though." "Think about it," James started, but I interrupted. Okay, I said. "Let's come back down to earth for a second. Best case scenario, Richardson is just a jerk who doesn't care about our personal well-being, right?" "Give it a rest," Don said, the one I least expected to snap at me. "Stop trying to act like the most rational guy in the room. You don't know what Richardson's into. He's into other things he'll never talk about publicly." I looked at the others and saw similar confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I've heard a little about this, actually," James said. "He has some fringe ideas. Let's just say that he's not the respected academic he presents himself to be," Dom said. "I've read some of the content that he doesn't publish. He thinks, and very seriously believes, that there's something else, something besides this." He knocked on the table. "Something more than material stuff." "I mean, that's not completely strange," I said with a shrug. "I was expecting worse." "You put it this way," Don continued, ignoring me. "Think back to the beginning of existence. There has to be conditions such that the universe's existence was possible. If the universe wasn't possible, then it couldn't have come to exist. Does that stand to reason?" We all nodded. "Okay. These conditions cannot be material nor laws of matter, since those came into being with the existence of the universe. So whatever those conditions are, they have to be something other than the basic substance of the universe. Does that make sense?" "I guess," I said. "This isn't turning into an argument of God, is it?" He shook his head. "It's an argument for something that continues to exist. Except we can't even say that. Because ideas like something and exist are developed by, for, and within physical reality. This is something pre-physical, something pre-existence. Whatever it is allowed the universe to spontaneously be. Who knows what else it's been doing these billions of years." Okay, just asking that question is already violating the stipulations, I started saying, my background in philosophy kicking in. Yes, Don said. "But he thinks it's the source of free will. Our brains touch it somehow. And so he believes he can reach it, study it, use it." I didn't get to read much more than that. "And if this experiment's something he's not putting in the books," James added, "it may do with his more peculiar interests. So instead of eliminating sleep, he's trying to make us see God?" I asked, sarcastically. "I don't know, brother," Dan said. "I'm just saying, if he thinks the brain touches another reality, this is just the kind of experiment he'd want to try to prove his theory." "You think he has this room bugged?" JT asked. "I think he might be in here somewhere," I said, without even thinking of what I was saying. They looked at me, waiting for an explanation, and with what looked like fear in their eyes. Strange we should be so afraid of this man we admired less than 2 weeks ago. I sometimes feel someone watching me sleep," I explained, my voice starting to tremble. "I figured it was one of you at first. I feel it especially when I'm not quite awake but not quite asleep. Those moments when you, wake for a few seconds to adjust your pillow, I could feel see and hear someone standing over me, just breathing, watching. I was too close to unconsciousness to do anything about it. Then I just fell back to sleep. I could see the terror filling the other's eyes while I spoke. "I've been feeling it too," Don said, almost in a whisper, like he was scared to be heard. "I thought I was losing it." "Me too," James said. "Someone else is in here," I said. We drew closer together, our eyes darting nervously around the gray concrete room. We were all feeling the same thing, I'm sure, that we were trapped inside this horrible building with someone or something else. Wait, JT said. "What would this person be eating? We don't see our food disappearing. There's no way out. There isn't really anywhere to hide. We gotta start being sensible." I let out a sigh of relief, because he was right. "Okay, let's think about this," I said. "Let's say this is another effect of the machine. Phase 2, paranoia." "Phase 2, paranoia," Don said, with a consenting nod. We wrote it down. The next day, when we all gathered together for breakfast, JT asked, "Have you all had any dreams?" We all shook our heads. "Richardson was right on the money with that one," I said. "Mm-hmm," he said. "Do you know feral children don't dream?" "How do we know that?" James asked. "They tell us. The few that get socialized, they say dreaming is something that starts only after, when they have language, object permanence, all that shit." "What about dogs?" I asked. "Like chasing rabbits in their sleep?" Autonomic responses. "Maybe language and object permanence impact only the ability to remember dreams," James said. "Both are consistent with the superficial data. The onus is on you to prove otherwise." JT scoffed. "What's your point anyway?" Don asked. "The point is, being dreamless, do you think it's healthy?" "I don't think it's healthy. I think the machine isn't making us not need sleep, it's making us not feel tired. I think all of this might be happening because we aren't dreaming." "We can't really answer, can we?" James said. "Dreams naturally accompany REM sleep, so we don't have any studies that differentiate between the effects of not dreaming and not sleeping. Or maybe we are dreaming, and the dreams are just going somewhere else," JT said. I didn't know what he meant by that. Nobody did. But we all stopped talking, and then dispersed. Something about it felt too true. Week 3. Our gatherings for theoretical discussion became rarer and rarer. We tended to isolate ourselves and eyed each other with suspicion. I still had those feelings of uneasiness and unwelcomeness every day, and each night the figure standing over me. I was sleeping even less now, about an hour tops, so little sleep that I started to catch it running away. The last time I was awake enough to see where it was going, it's this one particular corner of my room that always struck me as peculiar. I caught myself staring at it even when I didn't want to. It's a point where the angles are strange. My eyes have trouble focusing on it. The figure skulked straight to that point and disappeared into it. When I woke up fully, I questioned whether I'd hallucinated the whole thing. Perhaps Phase 3 hallucinations. I went over to that corner and looked at it closely. It smelled strange. Like turpentine. Then the more I stared at it, the more I forced my eyes to focus. I was sure something was moving inside. And it was watching me. I heard this awful, hate-filled sound come from deep in the corner then. I didn't wait around to understand what made that noise. I left that room for good. I took all of my short naps in the library from then on. While lying in the library, I overheard JT talking to someone in the corridor. He was telling him about the angles again. He said there are more degrees in the building than can be possible in a standard enclosed shape. 2.7488 degrees more, he said. Just enough to drive you nuts, but not enough to be obvious. Whoever he was talking to said something I didn't understand. Something like, those are the degrees of ripping. The voice was distorted somehow, so I can't be sure. What I was sure of was I didn't recognize that voice at all. Whoever JT was talking to wasn't one of us. Maybe silly, but I was scared. I stayed there pretending to be asleep while JT walked by, and as he did, I felt someone or something come into the room and stand over me. And then it went away. After a minute or so of telling myself I was being foolish, I went following after JT. I didn't see him anywhere. I bumped into James, and he also said he hadn't seen JT. Have you seen or heard anyone who shouldn't be in here? I asked him. James looked at me with a mixture of surprise and terror. How do you know? I haven't told anyone. About what? He told me he'd heard his mother calling to him. Not a faint sound that he confused for his mother, but her voice, clear as mine, calling out to him. He almost answered her. He said, almost. Then he stopped himself. She's been dead for a year, man, he said. Whatever was calling me, it wasn't my mother. I saw he was shaking and his hands were clenched. I told him to hang in there. It might be oral hallucination. I've been hearing things too, a crying child, so low at first I thought it was the plumbing. We should have a meeting, he said. I thought about JT and what I'd heard moments ago. Let's just tell Dawn, I said. It's a side effect of the machine. Makes sense, Dawn said after he told him. The sounds are not supposed to be audible, yet somehow our brains must be picking up the random patterns and interpreting them as something. The brain assigns a memory to make the pattern meaningful. Do you believe that? I asked. Not for a second, James said. But we had a shortage of rational explanations, and that was a pretty good one. I hoped he was right. A few days later, I found James in the gym, pounding away at the punching bag. I asked him if he was okay. He ignored me, so I went back to the reading room. A few minutes later, he was behind me. That voice I've been hearing is not my mother, he said. Of course not, I said. You've already decided that, after all. No, I mean... I don't know what I mean. It's just my mother was a kind person. Even if this voice is trying to sound like her, it's not like her at all. It's not kind. It's not human. I put my book down and looked him full on to see if he was serious. He was. Very much so. She's been telling me about all sorts of things, he said. She asked me do you remember the shed? I couldn't say anything to that. I was speechless. I never talked about that, for good reason. It took me years to come to terms with what happened. It was a long time ago. I was out playing behind our house in the woods as often as I did. I liked to construct shitty tree houses. One little off-property came to this shed. I'd never seen it before. It looked old, though. I remember that. I heard a kid crying inside. Thinking I might have a friend to make tree houses with, I looked through the window. The kid was all chained up. There was a dog bowl on the floor. I wanted to help, but I knew I was trespassing. I looked around, and that's when I saw this man, off about 20 feet into the woods. He was dressed all in black, old-fashioned clothes, like 19th century clothes. He had to have been watching me the whole time, expressionless. I went running all the way home. I was so scared I didn't tell my parents about it until I was supposed to go to bed, and I had to explain why I was terrified to go to sleep. They had the cops out right away. They found the shed. I heard they found the chains and bowl. But the kid was gone. I always blame myself for not helping the kid right away. Do you? James asked. Yeah. Okay, well, she's been telling me how to get out. I looked at him without a word because he sounded so manic. She said there's a secret exit inside JT. We have to cut him open to get to it. James, I said, unsure what else to say at that point. Oh, I know, he said with a gulp. I know it's not true. I just had to tell someone. I don't know what's going on in this place, he added. I'm scared, man. So was I. We had to get out of that octagon. Week 4. James and I started looking for a way out after that. Since we weren't sleeping at all now, we had plenty of time to do it. Every time we thought we'd found something, it was a dead end. It was while we were doing this that we saw Don standing alone in the corridor with his back to us. What's going on? James asked. Something about it seemed strange. Don, you okay? I called. He turned around and with a smile gave us a big wave. Bye, guys, he said, and walked around the corner. I looked at James to see if he was thinking the same thing as me, that something bad was about to happen, and he was already looking back at me. We took running after him. He was at the end of the next corridor already, getting in the elevator. Don, don't, we shouted, and ran after him. But the doors closed before we got there. He went up. The thing is, the octagon is a one-floor building. There's no elevator. Never before or after. I don't know where Don went or if what I think I saw really happened, but I know I never saw Don ever again. I don't understand, James said. What's happening? Before we could take time to think about it, a group of people rounded the corner and were walking towards us. I think we should go, I said. Who are they? He asked. James, let's go. Why are they blurry? I don't know, but we're going. I grabbed his arm and pulled him with me. Then I ran. I ran until I got to the kitchen and hid myself between the wall and fridge. I was sure James was right behind me. I could hear his footfalls the whole way, but when I looked, he was gone. I stayed there until my body couldn't really take it anymore, probably a few hours. When I slipped out, I saw someone peering at me from around the corner. I was so startled, I backed up against the wall. It was a little boy. Hello? I said. Then I heard screams. The boy was gone. More screams. I couldn't just leave someone in distress, not again. I ran towards the screams, scared of what might be happening to James. I heard a scream again, but this one choked out. It was coming from JT's room. I wished then and still wish I hadn't opened the door. James was in there. He'd sliced JT open. He was feeling around in his guts. The shocked, agonized expression was frozen on JT's face. "What did you do?" I asked. "I have to get out," James said as he dug through JT's intestines. I backed out of the room. I didn't know what else to do. I just had to find somewhere to hide until Richardson could get us out of here. Once I was out of the room, I heard James saying, "Mom?" And then, "Oh no. Oh no." And then he screamed. I ran back in. James was gone. The doorway to the room hadn't left my sight. There was no way he got out, but he was gone. And noxious black smoke was coming from JT's abdomen. It smelled like burning tires. I went back to the kitchen. I found a supply of candles, melted some wax onto paper towels, and I stuffed my ears with them. Then I curled up in a corner, my eyes closed, and waited for sleep to come. I waited a long time, but eventually it came. When I woke up, Professor Richardson was shaking me. He'd already pulled the paper towel out of my ears. I thought he'd come early. I found out later I'd been asleep for several days. He asked me where the others went. I told him everything. As much as I understood. I tried to take him to JT's body, but it was gone. Not a trace of blood. He took me to a hospital after that to make sure I was okay. "I'll foot the bill," he said. "Also, you can forget about your student loans." "Is that how it is?" I asked. "I put you in danger," he said. "So yes, you've earned it. If you keep quiet." I told him I couldn't keep quiet because of what happened to the others. You don't think those things really happened, do you? Would all the laws of the physical universe suspend themselves just for you four? No, those were waking dreams. You weren't supposed to dream at all. I thought I'd compensated for it. The machine needs tweaking. That's science. The others are fine. They'll be laying low for a while until I publish the results. Please do the same. I wanted to believe him. I've always considered myself a rational person. I just didn't believe him. Yeah, it all could have been a dream. That would be the simplest explanation, but it was no dream. I tried to find the others. I never could. I don't think they're fine at all. I tried to tell the police about it, but they wanted evidence. I couldn't even show them the octagon. James, JT, Don, if you're out there and you read this, let me know you're okay. And everyone else, let me tell you what I think. I think Professor Richardson was right about one thing. Sleep really is something we evolved to protect us, except not from the creatures that roam the forest at night. It protects us from something much worse, something all around us. It's not obsolete at all. I think that you should thank whatever you believe in that you have sleep and that you dream. I work at a gas station in rural Pennsylvania. It's a boring job, but it's pretty easy. Pays all right. A few weeks ago, this new guy started. I'll call him Jeremy. Jeremy's weird. He's about 25 or 26. And he hardly speaks, but he's got the creepiest laugh I have ever heard. My boss and I have both noticed this, but it's never been a problem, so there's not much we can do about it. Customers have never complained about him. He's always done his job fairly well. Up until a few weeks ago, anyway, and that's when things started going missing. Employee theft can be a problem at any business that sells consumer goods. There's only one person working at a time at this gas station. It's a pretty small place. About 2 weeks ago, my boss started noticing that we were short on motor oil. At first it was a few containers at a time, then entire shelves, boxes from the back room. Pretty soon, entire shipments would be gone the next day, after we got them. It would always be right after Jeremy's shifts. My boss has checked the security tapes from every single night that he worked, but he could never catch him in the act. Jeremy would lock up at closing, then the motor oil would be gone the next day. My boss usually takes the tapes home with him to try to catch Jeremy stealing, but his daughter had a softball game last night, so he asked me to watch the tapes for him. He offered to pay me overtime under the table, so obviously I took that offer. There are 3 cameras, so he gave me 3 different tapes to check. I figured it would be a long night, but I'm trying to save up for a vacation, so I really needed the money. I took the tapes home, popped them into an old VCR, and sat back. Two days ago, the last time he worked, Jeremy started at 4 p.m. Everything seemed pretty normal at first. He counted up his drawer, switched off with the girl who was working before him, and waited for a customer. The first person who came in was Mrs. Templeton. The timestamp on the video read 4:03. Regular. She picked up her cigarettes and a newspaper and paid with a 20. Nothing unusual there. The next customer was some local guy named Ron. He drives a motorcycle, usually comes in every few days. He filled up his tank, got a bag of beef jerky, paid with his credit card, and then he left. Next was some guy with a cowboy hat. I'd never seen him before, but we get plenty of strangers passing through, just like at any gas station. He got $40 worth of diesel fuel, paid with a $100 bill, went on his way. I sat back and sighed. The only thing more boring than doing this job is watching someone else do it. My boss's offer was enough to keep me watching, though, so I left the tape on. Everything seemed pretty normal. I had a feeling that if Jeremy was stealing motor oil, he knew we were suspicious of him by now. Didn't expect him to be dumb enough to let us catch him on camera. Things stayed boring and routine until about 5 o'clock. At 5:05, Mrs. Templeton came back in. Must have forgot something. But she didn't. She bought the same pack of cigarettes as before, and the same newspaper. She paid with another 20. That's odd, I thought. Then again, she's a little absent-minded. I thought Jeremy should have told her that she already got her smokes, but it's not against the rules to sell anybody the same thing twice. That's when Ron came in again. He bought another tank of gas for his motorcycle again. I later checked the outdoor camera because I thought maybe he had another car he wanted to fill up, and the same pack of beef jerky. He paid with his credit card again. No big deal. I figured this was just a weird coincidence. Mrs. Templeton is forgetful. Ron probably owns more than one Harley. And that's when the guy in the cowboy hat came back in. I felt a chill run down my spine. Don't get diesel. I found myself whispering to my empty living room. But he did. He got $40 worth of diesel fuel and paid with another $100 bill. Every move he made was identical to his first visit, right down to the way he scratched his nose before he walked out. Either this guy's rich, he owns a lot of trucks, and just moved into town, or something really bizarre was happening. I kept watching. Every customer for the next hour was the same as before. Every single one. I was seriously freaked out, and then at 6:03, Mrs. Templeton walked back in. She bought her cigarettes and newspaper again, and paid with a 20 again. I thought I was going to lose it. I only watched another half hour before I started fast-forwarding through the rest. It was all the same. Every customer would come in at the exact same time except 1 hour apart. Now I know what you're thinking. That sneaky motherfucker Jeremy had messed with the tapes. He had run a loop of his first hour of business over and over, but that wasn't the case. There were windows around the cash register area that the camera covers, and I watched the sunlight fade as time ran on. Jeremy's routine didn't loop over. He swept, mopped, restocked, and did all of his duties exactly how you would expect. But the same customers kept coming in. I was panicking at this point. Something was seriously wrong with what I was seeing, and I had no explanation for it. I skipped ahead when he looked up and walked out to his car. He hadn't stolen anything, but I kept watching just to make sure. I fast-forwarded one last time to about midnight. At exactly 12:03, out of nowhere, Jeremy's face pops up on the camera. I don't mean he moved his head into view. I mean, 1 second the store was empty. The next second his face was all I could see. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at me. I was sure of it. I screamed and fumbled for the remote. By the time I grabbed it, he was gone. Just as soon as he had left, one frame he was there, the next he wasn't. My hands were shaking like crazy, but I popped in another tape. The other indoor camera showed the back area by the cash register, and I'd be able to see how he got up to put his face in the camera like that. I skipped ahead to 12:03, but there was nothing. I would have been able to see him standing on a chair or something on this tape, but he wasn't there. I didn't see him enter the store at all after he left. It's like he wasn't really there. He doesn't know the security code. No alarms were triggered that night after he locked up. What I did see, however, was that at 12:03, the motor oil vanished off the shelf. All of it. Same as Jeremy's face. 1 second it's there, the next it wasn't. I turned that tape off and went to bed, but I didn't get a wink of sleep. My body's exhausted right now, but my mind is racing. That tape was undoubtedly the creepiest, most disturbing thing I've ever seen in my life. I work in a few hours. My boss asked me to bring the tapes back in and let him know what I found, but really, what the hell am I gonna say? Jeremy works the night shift tonight, directly after me, and the plan is for my boss to come in just before I leave and confront him with me, as I'm supposed to be the one who caught him stealing. I have no idea what I'm going to do. Suppose I'll have to show my boss the tapes, but I don't want to watch them with him. I never want to see something like that again. I can't get the image of Jeremy just smiling directly into the camera out of my mind. It's the creepiest look I've ever seen on another human being's face. Yeah, I'm going to try to get some last-minute sleep before I have to go in and deal with this. And I'll let you guys know what happens. Update, 2:49 p.m. Updating from my phone. Apologies in advance for errors. My boss just finished watching the last of the tapes. I told him what to expect, but you really can't prepare someone for something like that. He's scared shitless. I still am too. And Jeremy's due to come in at 4, so we got a little over an hour to get our shit together. But neither of us knows what to say to him. Is he just a fucked up guy who likes to steal motor oil, scare the shit out of people, or is he something else? I don't know if this is crazy, but does anyone think he could have anything to do with the time loop? My boss says he'd never noticed anything like that in the other tapes, but the way he popped up in that one, it made me think that he knew I would be watching. It's like he wanted me to see what he could do, like he was showing off or something. The way he smiled into the camera was like a little kid showing you a sandcastle they just built or something. I don't know. Probably sound crazy. I sure feel the part. I'm going to talk to my boss some more. We have to calm ourselves down and figure out how to handle this. I'll update you again tonight, but I have a really bad feeling about how this is going to play out. Update, 4:33 p.m. No sign of Jeremy. Tried calling him, but his phone's been disconnected. We're calling the police. Update, 5:33 p.m. Okay, paste, update. No sign of Jeremy. 6:33 p.m. Update, right? 6:33 no sign of Jeremy. 7:33 p.m. Right? Update, no sign of Jeremy. Now you paste, no sign of Jeremy. Update. 7:33 no sign of Jeremy. Tried calling. Now you paste, no sign of Jeremy. No sign of Jeremy. 7:33 update. 8:33 p.m. And this is the last time. No sign of Jeremy. Tried calling him. Blah blah. Update, 10:58 p.m. Holy shit! Holy shit! Holy shit! Holy shit! I just got home and I saw my previous updates. Things make less sense now than ever. Here's what I can tell you. I went to work. Jeremy never showed up. My boss and I decided to call the police, as you're well aware. When I picked up the phone to call, though, the sun went out. I shit you not, that's what I thought happened. Apparently, I blacked out for exactly 5 hours because when I looked back at the clock, it was 9:33. I think I got stuck in Jeremy's time loop. And then I snapped out of it at the exact point I blacked out, if that makes any sense. But that's when things got really weird. My boss was right next to me when I blacked out, ready to corroborate my story to the cops. When I came to, the phone was in my hand, but it was dead. Like, not even a dial tone. My boss was still right there, but he wasn't moving. He was standing up, but frozen. I looked at the clock again, and it wasn't moving. The second hand was stuck at 12. It was 9:33 exactly. The clock on the register computer screen wasn't moving either. My phone, frozen. There was a customer at the register waiting for my boss to get his cigarettes, but betting that would have been his 5th pack of the day. I got the fuck out of there. I didn't look up. I didn't turn the lights out. And sorry, guys, I didn't grab the security tapes to upload to the internet. Believe me, that was the last thing on my mind. The gas station it's on a major highway. Cars were parked all along it, except they weren't parked, they were frozen. The people inside were sitting still as wax statues. I got into my car, I prayed that it would start, and thankfully it did. About halfway home, time started up again. The static from the radio turned into music like it's supposed to be, and from what I could tell by listening to the host talk in between songs, nobody noticed the time freeze, or whatever it was. I was the only one. Well, I'm sure Jeremy noticed as well. I still have no clue where he is or what he's doing. I'm hiding in my room and calling the police again in the morning. I don't know if I ever got through to them before, or if I did, whether they took me seriously. I'm scared for my life at this point. I'll update tomorrow if I can. Final update. 10:33 a.m. I finally fell asleep last night around 4. I still have no idea how I did it. I guess exhaustion finally got the best of me. This morning I woke up to my phone ringing. It was my boss. He'd been calling me since around 6 o'clock. He woke up when time turned back on last night and immediately called the cops. They came by to see what was wrong, and he told them everything. The police around here are all small-time guys. They were more concerned about the missing motor oil than anything. My boss figured he'd take it, as long as he had their attention. They decided to go look for Jeremy. Now, we keep our employee's application on file, and since Jeremy just started working here, his was easy to find. They checked the address on it and headed over to his house, and you're not going to believe what they found. The address Jeremy listed on his application was an empty lot. Or at least, now it is. There used to be a house there, but it burned down in 1993. Being a small town, almost everyone remembers that fire. A family of 4 used to live there way back when. Rumor has it that they had an estranged son who they never really talked about, but I can't say for sure if that's true. What I can say is true is that after an insurance investigation, the fire was ruled as arson. The entire house soaked in oil and torched with a Molotov cocktail. The entire family was sleeping when it happened. None of them survived. They never caught the guy who did it. Rumor has it that when they tried to contact the estranged son, No one could find him. Anyway, my boss called me and told me this, and I freaked out. And he asked me to come to the gas station. Like, what, are you crazy? I said. But he assured me the cops were there with him. Then he dropped a bomb. The FBI were also in town, and they were going to talk to me one way or another. So I might as well come in. It was about 7:15, and I wanted to go back to bed, but I figured I wouldn't be able to sleep much more anyway. So I went down. 4 men in suits greeted me and told me to have a seat. We went over everything 2 or 3 times until they got all the details down. I told them about Jeremy, the security tapes, last night at work. Eventually, everything. Finally, after I finished, one of the agents said, "Christ, we got another one on our hands." Then they made me sign a bunch of papers saying I wouldn't tell anyone about whatever happened. So I can't say much more. I might be breaking the law just by posting this. So now I'm home. I'm not sure what to do with myself. That agent's words when I told him the story are going to haunt me for the rest of my life. Anyway, I've got to go. I have some errands to run today, and then I have to go into work to pick up some tapes. My boss and I think this new guy, Jeremy, is a complete creep. He's stealing motor oil. I have to watch the security footage to see if I can catch him doing it. I have better things to do, but my boss is paying me overtime, under the table, and I'm trying to save up for vacation so I could really use the money. It should be pretty simple. The oil always goes missing right after his shifts. I figure I'll just watch the tapes, catch him in the act, and that'll be that. I used to go diving a lot. Not so much anymore, but a couple of years ago, I was really into it. I had my license and everything. It was really beautiful down there. Pale patterned sand, the water washing away the distance like a blue mist. Flashes of the brightest colors you've ever seen. Some of these fish would just dart into view. My favorite thing to do is to just hover right where the shelf plunges into the deep. You get the greatest dynamics there as deep sea creatures come up to feed. Anyway, one time I was drifting along near Antigua, about 40 feet down. I had 2 tanks with me so I could stay down for several hours. The shelf sloped off to my left, and rocks and coral broke the monotony of the sand to my right. I hadn't seen much that day, and I was getting a bit bored, but then I noticed a large octopus. It was like a deep sea type, probably washed up accidentally. They don't usually come up to hunt. And it seemed sluggish. It didn't react much when I drifted over to it. Now, octopi aren't very friendly creatures. If you can manage to get near one, they usually flee within seconds. I'm sure that you've seen videos of them. They change colors to match their environment. Not all species do that, but they're all very good at hiding. So seeing a deep sea octopus up close, it was quite an opportunity. It was about a foot from crown to beak and dark mottled green. His tentacles curled around it, perhaps 4 feet long, when extended, and pale on the underside. Its eyes looked like golden rings around narrow black pupils. It was having trouble moving and looked half dead. I decided to try to get near it. There were some yellow-tailed jacks nearby, and I speared one with my knife. Sorry if that offends you. I'm not one of those touch-nothing divers, But cautiously, I approached the octopus and offered it my fish, shoving it out ahead of me, letting it drift towards the creature. Success. It didn't run, but lazily reached an arm out to capture the morsel. Brought it under to its beak, and it began to devour it, and I drifted closer and tried to acclimate it to my presence. Over maybe half an hour or so, it became more lively and used to my presence, and apparently I bought its tolerance with my offering, and it even began to play a little bit, darting away from me and then back. I had a stick with me that I used to test holes in mud and such, and it occurred to me that maybe I could teach it to play fetch. I brought the stick out, waved it, till it seemed like I had its attention, Then I threw the stick out sideways. It didn't go very far, underwater of course, but the octopus went after it, grabbed it with its tentacles. He didn't seem inclined to return it to me, though. So I swam over, was waving the stick at me, and then tossed it out into the side. He's copying me. I retrieved the stick, and then an interesting idea came into my head. Next to us was a large, flat rock, covered in half an inch of mud and detritus. Careful not to disturb the layers, I took the stick and slowly drew a crude figure of a man. 2 legs, 2 arms, and a round head coming off a central cylinder. The octopus seemed to be watching with interest. I tossed it the stick, and it caught it easily. It sat there toying with it, and for a few moments I thought my expectations had been too high, but then it reached out with a stick and began tracing its own mark on the mud. It was even cruder than mine, to be sure, but very clearly a drawing. However, the proportions were all wrong. It had fused the head and the body into one ball, and there were too many legs. I was just happy it was copying me. I'd heard octopi were smart, but this was really something. But then it hit me like a freezing wave. The octopus wasn't drawing my drawing, it was drawing itself. The implications for this were huge. If I had a video camera, I would have been a famous man. The only other animal I'm aware of that's capable of the imagination and self-awareness to do something like this was like the ape, first cousin to humans. That the ancient octopus, without so much as a spinal column, had the mental capacity for such a feat would surely have turned biology on its head. However, I didn't have a camera, and the scientists I've told my story to greeted it with understandable skepticism. I put all my time into trying to prove it myself, but I just can't bring myself to go diving anymore. Anyway, once that realization struck, I got excited. The octopus passed the stick back, and I began drawing the other sea creatures and common sights. We kept on for maybe an hour. The octopus contributed as much as I. He even drew something I took to be a crude figure of a submarine, with a con tower, propeller screw, and even torpedo holes. Finally, the octopus led me to the other side of the rock, blank canvas. Far down in the corner, it again drew itself, and then me. These figures were very small, maybe an inch or 2 tall. Then, painstakingly, it went to work on a much larger drawing. At first I thought it was a whale, but whales are roughly the size of a submarine, so it didn't seem to justify the scale. Furthermore, the proportions were all wrong. This seemed like something humped and compact, almost as if it was upright rather than aquiline. It had weird bits sticking out. It didn't seem like fins. Couldn't place it. An oil platform, maybe? The lines were too natural. An octopus wouldn't know what the top of a platform looks like. When the drawing was done, we both sat and looked at it for a while. I took the stick back from the octopus, it circled the drawing of us, and then drew a line to the thing. I'm not sure if the octopus picked up on my confusion, because it just sort of sat there for a while. I didn't try to take the stick back. Then it started swimming away. I followed it at a distance. It seemed to be keeping a pace, leading me on. Then it turned and it shot out into the deep area of the shelf. I was a good way through my second tank and wasn't supposed to go any deeper, so I had to let it go. It stopped once to watch me, and then darted off, dissolving into the dark blue depths. I looked after it for a minute to see if it would return, but it was nothing, so I started watching the other fish and making my way back to the boat. And then suddenly, there was a low, thrumming sound all around me. It wasn't very loud, but it was big, as if it came from the ocean floor itself. I've heard of underwater eruptions, but I've never been in one, and I wondered if I was about to be. but this didn't sound like anything natural. It sounded like the call of some animal, slowed down into the virtually subsonic range and projected from huge speakers very far away. I've had a chance to look over the seismograph recordings of that day, and nothing showed up at that time for that frequency. I have no idea why. The fish were going crazy, darting back and forth and all heading inland. And not just the reef fish. Larger ones from deeper in were streaming by me and faster. Suddenly among them, the octopus appeared again. That, or one quite like it. It swam up to me and eyed me strangely, then darted past with the rest. The thrumming sounded again. Looking out to sea, I gradually became aware of a large, dark patch. It was very hard to tell how big or far away it was, but there was plenty of both to go around. It was hard to tell more than just a shadow in the murky water, but it clearly wasn't a whale or anything man-made. I couldn't even tell if it was a single creature. It seemed to be long strands like kelp or jellyfish tentacles streaming off of it, but immeasurably larger. It looked like nothing so much as an ancient, misshapen section of coral reef broke off and floating, at least the part I could see. It seemed to fade off into the distance as though that mass, immense as it may be, was only a limb to some far larger entity. I've never seen a naval carrier from underwater, but I imagine that's the kind of shadow it would cast. Thrumming rang out a third time, and unreasonable fear seized me. I didn't appear to be in danger, though the thing was vaster than anything I'd ever seen. It was too far away to reach me quickly, and it seemed like it wouldn't fit into the shallows anyway. Nevertheless, I was gripped by the feeling that if I didn't get away as fast as I could, I'd be dragged down into the abyss and consumed. I could feel the very water itself drawing down into the black maw. Heedless of the depths of my equipment, I surged upwards. As I rose, of course, I began cramping, but I clawed my way up anyway. I was still far from the boat. When I broke the surface, I could barely move. I had to keep my mouthpiece in because I couldn't keep my mouth above water. I certainly couldn't call or signal the boat. Far from receding, my panic was worse than ever from above the water. I couldn't see the thing or tell whether it was coming for me. I thrashed my slow, painful way towards the boat, and finally, someone on board noticed me, and they came to pick me up. I had the bends bad. I had to stay in a hospital for a few weeks until it was over. The doctors told me I was lucky not to get a stroke or some other permanent damage. So that's my story. Sorry, I can't give a more satisfying conclusion. I still don't know myself what I experienced. My friends think that it was some form of rapture, but it just doesn't match the symptoms. Narcosis is supposed to reduce anxiety, not stimulate it. And my hallucinations, if that's what they were too vivid and specific. Anyway, since then I've always been afraid of the water. I tried going out once or twice, but all I can do is stay shaking in the boat. I think there really was something out there. And I don't think it's something I ever want to come across again. It was a car accident. Nothing particularly remarkable, but fatal nonetheless. He left behind a wife and 2 children. It was a painless death. The EMTs tried their best to save you, but to no avail. Your body was so utterly shattered, you were better off, trust me. And that's when you met me. What? What happened? Where am I? You died, I said, matter-of-factly. No point mincing words. There was a truck, and it was skidding. Yup. I died? Yup. But don't feel bad about it. Everyone dies, I said. You looked around. There was nothingness. Just you and me. What is this place? You asked. Is this the afterlife? More or less, I said. Are you God? You asked. Yep, I replied. I'm God. My kids. My wife, you said. What about them? Will they be all right? That's what I like to see, I said. You just died, and your main concern is for your family. That's good stuff right there. You looked at me with fascination. To you, I didn't look like God. I just looked like some man, some vague authority figure. More of a grammar school teacher than the Almighty. Don't worry, I said. They'll be fine. Your kids will remember you as perfect in every way. They didn't have time to grow contempt for you. Your wife will cry on the outside, but will be secretly relieved. To be fair, your marriage was falling apart. If it's any consolation, she'll feel very guilty for feeling relieved. Oh, you said. So what happens now? Do I go to heaven? Or hell? Or something? Neither, I said. You'll be reincarnated. Ah, you said. So the Hindus were right. All the religions are right in their own way, I said. Walk with me. You followed along as we strolled in the void. Where are we going? Nowhere in particular, I said. It's just nice to walk while we talk. So what's the point then? You asked. When I get reborn, I'll just be a blank slate, right? A baby. So all my experiences and everything I did in this life won't matter. Not so, I said. You have within you all the knowledge and experience of all your previous lives. You just don't remember them right now. I stopped walking and took you by the shoulders. Your soul is more magnificent, beautiful, and gigantic than you can possibly imagine. A human mind can only contain a tiny fraction of what you are. It's like sticking your finger in a glass of water to see if it's hot or cold. You put a tiny part of yourself in the vessel, and when you bring it back out, you've gained all the experience it had. You've been a human for the last 34 years, so you haven't stretched out yet and met the rest of your immense consciousness. If we hung out here for longer, you'd start remembering everything, but there's no point doing that between each life. How many times have I been reincarnated then? Oh, lots. Lots and lots, and into lots of different lives, I said. This time you'll be a Chinese peasant girl in 540 AD. Wait, what? You stammered. You're sending me back in time? Well, I guess technically. Time as you know it only exists in your universe. Things are different where I come from. Where do you come from? I pondered. Oh, sure, I explained. I come from somewhere else. And there are others like me. I know you'll want to know what it's like there, but you honestly won't understand. Oh, you said, a little let down. But wait, if I get reincarnated to other places in time, could I have interacted with myself at some point? Sure. Happens all the time. And with both lives, only aware of their own time span. You don't even know it's happening. So what's the point of it all? Seriously. You're asking me for the meaning of life. Isn't that a little stereotypical? Well, it's a reasonable question, you persisted. I looked into your eyes. The meaning of life, the reason I made this whole universe, is for you to mature. You mean mankind? You want us to mature? No, just you. I made this whole universe for you. With each new life, you grow and mature and become a larger and greater intellect. Just me? What about everyone else? There is no everyone else, I said. In this universe, there's just you and me. You stared blankly at me. But all the people on Earth, all you. Different incarnations of you. Wait, I'm everyone? Now you're getting it, I said, with a congratulatory slap on the back. I'm every human who ever lived. Or who will ever live. Yes. I'm Abraham Lincoln. And you're John Wilkes Booth, too, I added. I'm Hitler? You said, appalled. And you're the millions he killed. I'm Jesus. And you're everyone who followed him. You fell silent. Every time you victimized someone, I said, you were victimizing yourself. Every act of kindness you've done to yourself. Every happy and sad moment ever experienced by any human was, or will be, experienced by you. Why? You asked me. Why do all this? Because someday you'll become like me. Because that's what you are. You're one of my kind. You're my child. Whoa, you said, incredulous. You mean I'm a god? No, not yet. You're a fetus. You're still growing. Once you've lived every human life throughout all time, you will have grown enough to be born. So the whole universe, you said, it's just an egg of sorts, I answered. And now, it's time for you to move on to your next life. And with that, I sent you on your way. During the summer of 2003, events in the northeastern United States involving a strange, human-like creature sparked brief local media interest before an apparent blackout was enacted. Little to no information was left intact, as most online and written accounts of the creature were mysteriously destroyed. Primarily focused on rural New York State and once found in Idaho, self-proclaimed witnesses told stories of their encounters with a creature of unknown origin. Emotions ranged from extremely traumatic levels of fright and discomfort to an almost childlike sense of playfulness and curiosity. While their published versions are no longer on record, the memories remain powerful. Several of the involved parties began looking for answers that year. In early 2006, the collaboration had accumulated nearly 24 documents dating between the 12th century and present day, spanning 4 continents. In almost all cases, the stories were identical. I've been in contact with a member of this group and was able to get some excerpts from their upcoming book. A suicide note, 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it necessary to assuage my guilt or pain. I feel it necessary to assuage my guilt or pain I have introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him. For once, I awoke and felt his presence. And once I awoke and saw his form. Once again I awoke and heard his voice and looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what I might next awake to experience. I cannot ever wake. Goodbye. Found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and 1 loose personal letter with no envelope. Dearest Lynn, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name. A journal entry translated from Spanish, 1880. I've experienced the greatest terror. I've experienced the greatest terror. I've experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They're hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand. I will not sleep. His voice. A mariner's log, 1691. He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed, I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not come here again at the request of the rake. From a witness in 2006. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip to Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids straight to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologized and told him I thought that he was out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped, pulled his feet up from the end of the bed so quickly his knee almost knocked me out of the bed. He then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for a half second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, was what appeared to be a naked man, or a large, hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked into the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, it scrambled around the side of the bed and then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of way right along the covers until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. He was completely silent for about 30 seconds, probably closer to 5, but it seemed like a while, and just looked at my husband. It then placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway leading to the kids' room. I screamed. I ran for the light switch, planning to stop this thing before it hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouched and hunched over about 20 feet away. It turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter, Clara. The creature ran down the stairs as my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was badly injured, spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the rake." My husband drove his car into a lake that night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. They didn't survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quick. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a similar story. We got in contact, talked about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature that we now refer to as the rake. It took the four of us 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be accounts of the rake. None of them gave any details, history, or follow-up. One journal held an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages, then never mentioned it again. The ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the rake. That was the last entry on the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visits was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led to wonder if the rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder next to my bed, left it running all night. Every night for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed each day when I woke up. By the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through the recordings at 8 times the normal speed. It still took almost an hour. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the rake. I can't listen to it long enough to even begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and I now believe that it spoke when it was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice on the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that might have gone through my daughter's head made me very upset. I haven't seen the rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he's been in my room while I slept. I know, and I fear that one night, I'll wake up to see him staring at me. I'm not a paranormal investigator. I'm an author. While looking for inspiration for a book, I came across a series of stories surrounding a home in the American Pacific Northwest. It's an extremely ordinary-looking house in an extremely ordinary-looking residential neighborhood, but the stories that have emanated from its former residents and the people who live in the town that it's located in are quite extraordinary. Through my research of the house on Wendell Lane, I've come across accounts that range from the supernatural to just plain bizarre. In order to protect the privacy of the people in the town and the current inhabitants of the house on Wendell Lane, I have not only changed the name of everyone in these stories, but the name of the street as well. Wendell Lane is just an alias for the true location of these accounts. Daniel Huff is a drifter who's been described as dangerous and unbalanced. He is currently wanted for the murder of his wife, Margaret. 7 years ago, she was allegedly thrown from the top of their apartment complex. Daniel, who was the only witness, claimed that she jumped, but disappeared shortly after an investigation was launched. He's been said to turn up at the funerals of suicide victims making strange claims and asking family members about the circumstances surrounding their loved ones' deaths. In March of this year, an anonymous tip led police to a hotel room he had rented in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. He was not present, but many of his belongings were recovered. The following is an excerpt from his audio journal. It involves a former resident of the house on Wendell Lane. The case he references is very public, so the important names have been edited out in order to prevent people from digging into the house and learning its true location. Margaret, it's been 7 years, and every morning when I wake up I still roll over expecting to see you there, lying next to me. I swear you used to glow in the morning. It isn't fair what happened. It isn't right with it. That thing did to you. I'm gonna make it pay, though. I promise you, I'm gonna make it pay. Things have been quiet for about 6 months. thought the trail had run cold, but 5 weeks ago, a story started getting picked up by media circles, and I thought it sounded like our friend was back. A woman in recently headlines for the murder of her 8-year-old daughter. Her defense attorney was lobbying hard for an insanity plea, and she claims to be suffering from a total loss of memory in the hours surrounding her daughter's death. This situation-specific amnesia might sound all too convenient, but her story did share some common elements with the other cases I've looked into, so I've decided to dig a little deeper. I was glad I did, because what I found was exactly the kind of break I've been waiting for. A clinical psychologist was assigned to the case in order to assess her mental faculties. He performed many tests during his examination and did eventually concluded that her insanity plea did carry merit. During his testimony, he cited the hypnotherapy sessions he performed on her as one of the things that swayed his decision. I was able to obtain a copy of one of these sessions after breaking into his office, and after listening to it, my suspicions were confirmed. Damn thing's reared its ugly head again and ruined yet another person's life. Still, it's curious this happened on the other side of the country. Did my thinking that it only seemed to lurk around the Northeast, since every single incident that's ever been reported has come out of New England. Yet here it is, turning up in... Strange. It could be another factor at play here. I've looked into the place, and though this is the only incident regarding the creature I've been hunting, the house itself, I don't know, it seems to have a history of paranormal activity. Maybe some places are just magnets for these types of things, I don't know. I don't really care. All that matters is that I find this thing and I put it down. Play the recording I've obtained. Margaret, if you can hear it, I know you'd be pleased. It's back, and I feel like I'm closer to it than ever. So you hadn't heard the stories? No, I hadn't heard any of the stories about the house until after Lily and I moved in. I actually first heard about it through her. She came crying home from school one day because the kids found out where she lived and were teasing her about it. What do they say? The kids say it was haunted. Do you believe that? Is that why you're here? No, I don't think it's haunted. I mean, I don't know, but I think it's something else. You said you heard other stories. Yeah, a guy I work with lived in the town his whole life. He had at least a dozen different stories he's heard over the years. My neighbor's teenage daughter wouldn't babysit Lily unless she came over to her house. So, are you ready to begin the hypnotherapy session? Yeah, I'm ready, Doctor. I'm going to fast forward the audio here. The doctor spends about 20 minutes getting her in the right state of mind. It isn't important. The audio will pick back up at the good stuff. I always thought hypnosis was bullshit, but whatever he did seemed to work, because it doesn't really sound like herself anymore. It's like she's been sedated, like she's, taking a bunch of morphine or something. Please tell me your name. My name's Jean. Very good. I want you to listen to me. Pay attention to my questions. Answer them the best of your ability. You're back in the house now, right before Lily died. Tell me what you see. It's late. I'm looking at the digital clock on the DVD player. It's 2:22 a.m. You can't sleep? No. I tried earlier, but something didn't feel right. I've never felt so uncomfortable in my own bed before. So what do? You watch TV? Yes, but nothing is on. Still, it feels better than lying in bed. Where is Lily? I put her to bed hours ago. She cried when I tucked her in. And why was she crying? She said that she saw a monster in her room last night. She was scared. I told her that if she gets scared, she can hide under her blanket, and that no monster can get her there. So you're watching TV. You look at the clock, it says 2:22. Then what? I hear a noise coming from Lily's room. A noise? What kind of noise? Like a thud? No, like an animal. Or a man. I don't know, it sounds like a person growling, like if a person was doing an impression of what an angry dog might sound like. Could it be Lily? I don't think Lily can make this noise. She's only 8, and this voice has too much bass in it for a little girl. I'm scared. What happens next? As I approach the door, the noise gets louder. I open the door. And what do you see? It's Lily. She's standing in the middle of her room with her lavender floral print blanket draped over her head. It's oversized, and she's just a little girl, so it covers her whole body and drapes across the floor. I think she's facing the closet. The noise is coming from her. Has Lily ever done anything like this before? No. What happens next? I call her name. I'm so nervous that my voice barely escapes as a whisper. She stops making that snarling noise and turns in my direction. Lily, I say a little louder. What are you doing? Then I hear Lily's voice. It's barely audible. Mommy. It sends shivers down my spine because it's not coming from the blanket. Lily's voice isn't coming from the blanket. Where's it coming from then? From her closet. I tiptoe around the mound in the middle of the room. I keep my eyes on it the whole time. It doesn't move, but it begins growling again. It's louder this time. My heart is racing 1,000,000 miles an hour. I feel like it's going to jump out of my chest. I get to the closet and open the door. Lily is sitting behind it. She's been crying. I pick her up in my arms. She buries her head on my shoulder. Something else is in the room with you and Lily, and it's under the blanket. Yes. I'm not fully grasping it until just now. I'm praying in my head that whatever is under Lily's blanket doesn't come out. It's still growling. The noise is getting louder, and now I know I have to go back around it to get to the door. What is Lily doing? She is crying, holding me tight. And what happens next? I start to move slowly for the door, but it begins to shift under the blanket. I feel like my legs are frozen. Frozen how? Too scared to move? I'm scared, but I don't know. I just can't move. Then it shows itself to me. It comes out from under the blanket, and it's terrible. It's a monster. There's no other way to describe it. It has big black eyes and long, sharp fingers. Its skin is yellow. Its mouth, it's awful. It's the most awful thing I've ever seen. You still can't move. My whole body feels like a statue. Lily's begging me to run, but I can't. It moves like an animal, stalking us on all fours, but in my heart I know it's not me that it wants, it's her. It wants Lily. Yes. Yes, it sneaks its way right up to us, but it's completely ignoring me now, and I'm not sure if it ever really cared I was there. I realize now I can't talk. God, why can't I talk? I'm paralyzed. Lily's scared. It's staring right into her eyes. It extends a finger and scratches her on the cheek. I want to scream, but I can't. I'm helpless. This thing just made my baby bleed. I think I want to watch as it tortures her, but after that, it leaves. It leaves. Where does it go? Out the window. I can move again after that. I carry Lily into the kitchen. I put her on the counter so I can dial the police. Is she still crying? No, she's catatonic. I'm terrified, so I can't imagine how she must be feeling. When I finally get the operator, I tell her what happened, but she doesn't believe me. She asks if I'm on any medication. And what happens next? I remember the window's unlocked in Lily's bedroom, so I head back in there to make sure the thing hasn't returned. And it isn't back. I lock the window, and as I'm doing this, I'm trying to convince the damn dispatcher to send the police over to my house, and then I go back into the kitchen. Lily is standing there with a carving knife. She has it pointed towards her stomach. She looks at me, except she's not looking at me. She's looking through me. And her eyes are glassy and glazed over, and again I'm frozen. Even though I lock the window, I can feel that thing's presence in the room. I can't move. I want to go to her, but I can't. Something's not letting me. She drives the knife into her stomach. She does it again and again and again, and it's terrible. And when she's done, she falls to the floor, and her face is white. So much blood all over the floor. I'm in shock. All I could do is stare at her right before she shuts her eyes, and she whispers something to me. It's barely audible, but I'm able to hear it. What does she say? She says, "He is the rake." It is said that time and tide wait for no man. But the painter waits for both. Mikey Doyle steered a boat into the swell of a brooding ocean, leaving the safety of harbor walls. This is too early, he thought with a yawn. Perhaps he was right. Even for commercial fishermen, this was early. But despite the storm warnings, Mikey had a haul to secure. He was not fishing, though, nor crab or lobster, but a haul nevertheless. 3 miles down the coast from the tourist-rich sea harbor of Port Maven would be a lonely marker buoy that, while only being a yellow ball of beaten plastic, held the answer to Mikey's hopes and dreams. Because attached to that buoy was a line to a waterproof parcel the size of a beer crate, the contents of which would have a street value of $1.5 million. Once it was cut, divided, and subdivided again. Mikey, of course, wouldn't be getting all that, but he was still getting a good payday for his part. Enough to clear his debts, and then some. His car payments had slipped, and he had been ducking his landlord for the last 2 months. Then there was the new one, child support. He knew he had a daughter called Rose. He'd only seen her once, and that had been by accident at a country pub 6 years ago. She had just turned 3. He had ghosted the mother from the start, choosing not to get involved. Mikey had never worked a day in his life, not that the tax man knew of, not until getting a job doing event security last summer. Then, with his second paycheck, he got a weighty demand from the government welfare. He'd claimed the kid wasn't his, right up until the DNA test results came back. She was. Now he stared absently at the sea, where miniature white horses broke on rolling wave tops, barely illuminated in the darkness. The stars were nowhere to be seen tonight, hidden behind a veil of cloud that only allowed for glimpses of moonlight. Sea spray would occasionally burst from the prow, soaking his face and stinging his eyes if he dared step out of the cabin. There was only one debt he couldn't pay, and that was to do with the boat he stood on. The boat wasn't actually his. It belonged to Jim Lunkin, Mikey's best friend, or rather, he had been. No matter how much you want to make things right, it's so much harder when that person is dead. The locals had noticed Jim's sudden absence, guessing he'd gone visiting family in the north, and that they'd see him again in a few weeks. Mikey knew that wasn't the case. He knew that Jim wouldn't be showing up with a smile and a six-pack. He knew Jim wouldn't be making a surprise appearance on karaoke down at the Lighthouse Inn. Mikey knew the list of things Jim wouldn't be doing was endless because Jim had been hacked into several pieces and dumped in the ocean 5 miles offshore. Mikey wished he'd never brought Jim into his dealings, but he needed a boat quickly, and drug runners were not known for patience. Mikey had been out of time, but on that fatal night, Mikey had been accompanied by men higher up the food chain, and the delivery had been more than a well-wrapped parcel. Clinging to the buoy were 2 Vietnamese girls. He guessed they were Vietnamese. When did he know? They were wearing life jackets which barely held their heads out of the water. They couldn't have been any older than 18. When Mikey got back to the harbor, Jim had been there. Jim was already getting cold feet about the parcel, so when he saw 2 girls being pulled from his boat and manhandled into the back of a van, he pretty much lost his shit. It was morally the correct reason, Mikey thought, but it didn't make it a clever one. Mikey had said nothing. He kept his mouth shut when the girls went in the van. He kept his mouth shut when Jim spoke out on the harbor. He kept his mouth shut when they shot Jim in the head. He even kept his mouth shut when they dragged Jim, his best friend of 9 years, back on the boat and began cutting him up. Mikey always looked out for number 1 before anything else. The world just made more sense to him that way. What really pissed Mikey off was that the thing with Jim had gotten the dealers so riled up, they didn't pay him. They told him he was lucky he hadn't been shot in the head himself for bringing in a fuck-up like Jim, who could have ruined the whole setup. Mikey said nothing. He throttled down as he approached the marker, leaving the engine to idle. Grabbing a boat hook, he began dragging the buoy to him. Easy money, he thought. It took another 10 minutes to secure the package, hoisting it up from the seabed, using the winch mounted at the rear of the boat. He scanned around frequently, looking for the telltale lights piercing the darkness. Meanwhile, the wind had continued to pick up, starting to howl as the swell of the waves grew. He was now struggling to stand, but the pickup was done. Nothing to do but head home and get paid. The first mile back was rough, riding a growing swell, feeling the prow rise and fall. But the next mile was about to get much worse. The hull almost left the water at times, slamming down again and again after each wave. What wasn't lashed down got tossed about like dice in a gambler's cup. Mikey braced himself in the small cabin, both hands gripping at the wheel. He was sure he'd encountered worse conditions, but nothing sprang to mind. He glanced over his shoulder to check the parcel, lashed down at the stern. That, at least, wasn't going anywhere. He was only a mile out from the harbor that it happened. Mikey was out of breath, not being an experienced or qualified seaman. As the conditions worsened, he remembered something about letting your boat lie ahull, which is to let it take its own position in the sea whilst trying to keep the bow in the wind. He had remembered that because it reminded him of his own life. Just keep going with the flow. What Mikey didn't know was that while it's an okay tactic in moderate to severe gales, there became a point when it wasn't, and if you stick with it, you risk getting capsized. The boat twisted atop of what was surely the largest wave yet. Mikey could see the flash of the lighthouse, but that wasn't going to help him any. As he landed broadside into the next tower of water, the whole boat tilted beyond 90 degrees, throwing him off the wheel and against the wall, bouncing his skull on the metal doorway. Suddenly, everything snapped to black. He awoke in a confused haze. The light of day was now filtered through a gray, miserable fog. The only sound from the chugging of the inboard engine, barely ticking over. He lay on the deck, his face resting in the damp, tasting blood in his mouth and salt on his lips, reveled at no longer being battered by the ocean. It was still. Calm. Quiet. Getting to his feet, the first thing he did was check the parcel. It was still there, the sealed plastic block secure in its place. He breathed a sigh of relief before looking around to get his bearings. Mikey couldn't believe his luck. Only yards ahead of him, made out of the harbor wall and the lighthouse, together they stood out in the mist, two distinct and familiar silhouettes, silent guardians thrust into a graying sky. He didn't know how long he'd been out for. Figured he must have gotten all turned around, but letting the boat do its own thing had worked out for him in the long run. It almost seemed as if someone up there had been watching out for him. He banged his fist on the rail with excitement. "Fucking yes, Mikey!" he shouted. Man, he was happy to be alive. "Fucking yes!" Swinging the wheel, he headed into the harbor with a grinning face. That was when he noticed it. The paint. For hundreds of feet, the harbor's stone walls had been covered in it. So had the lighthouse, even the glass where the light shone. It was thick and crudely applied. A million drips ran through it, making it seem alive and breathing. Black paint. Not a black you would choose from a color chart, or paint a chalkboard with, but black stolen from the primordial void. Black imbued with dark patience that promised to outweight the light. He looked around, thinking to himself how pissed the harbor master was going to be as he stared through the fog at the other boats moored up. Everyone, it seemed, had been painted. Every single one. From the skiffs to the giant trawlers, even the glass-bottom boats for tourists, every inch was covered. But it didn't stop there. The mooring ropes, too. They glistened in the black ooze, as did the anchor chains running down into the river. The marker buoys and the flagpoles, including the flag itself, was painted beyond recognition, and they all dripped with the same heavy black. As he drifted slowly through the outer harbor, the fog cleared away. He expected to see a lot of seriously pissed off people. Especially the harbor master's name was eluded him for the moment. He was a stickler for the rules, or a real prick, as Mikey often liked to say. He expected to see a hive of outrage and indignation any moment now. Any moment. Nobody. No one. He should have been seeing vans coming and going, forklifts hoisting crates, tourists drinking coffee, and fishermen exchanging banter. That's when the silence hit him. Other than the soft lapping of the ocean, there was nothing else. Where are the damn gulls? He thought. There were always gulls crying at the harbor. Their persistent screeching was almost part of the landscape. Where are the gulls? The inner harbor didn't hold any answers, though, only more questions, as every building on the harbor front was coated in darkness. He stared in disbelief at the ice cream shop, the visitors' museum, his favorite restaurant. Not an inch had been spared, the windows and doors, the gutters and lights. All he could make out was little more than a memory of form and thick black paint. In every direction he looked, the paint had spread out, a dark cancer growing in the heart of the village. His first thought was that he was the victim of some practical joke, but he discounted the idea almost immediately. This was too much work. Too much trouble. Maybe then it was a set for a movie or a TV crew. Sometimes the harbor was used as a filming location, but the more he thought about it, the less likely it seemed. Where were the film crew? The catering? Security? Why hadn't he heard about it? Everything had looked picture perfect when he had set aboard earlier. He shook his head and moored up, tying off an anchor point covered in the same black paint. It didn't smell like paint. It didn't really smell of anything. Perhaps a little musty. It made him think of decay. He made a point of not touching it and headed into the back streets. That's when he first heard it. Laughter. An innocent ripple of a child's joy. Just for a second. He looked for the source of the laughter but couldn't figure a direction. Increasingly concerned, he turned up a narrow street where even the cobblestones under his feet were painted black. He didn't like the way it felt when he walked on them, instantly regretting taking the shortcut towards the Lighthouse Inn. But someone would be there for sure, he thought. There's always someone there. Then he saw two things that stopped him dead in his tracks. Two things he knew instantly were connected. Two things that couldn't be. The first was a figure, tall and hooded, covered in folds of black cloth, soaking wet with dripping black paint. It carried an ancient-looking bucket in a long-fingered translucent hand and a wide, oversized brush in its other. It was silently painting a building in single strokes, its arm extended impossibly ever longer to reach the rooftop as it did, where its face should have been. There was nothing. The second thing Mikey saw was a man. Just a normal man cowering in the shadow of a doorway behind the dark painter. The painter hadn't appeared to notice him yet. It was this normal man who terrified Mikey more than the supernatural painter. It was his best friend, Jim. Jim Lunkin. Jim, who was chopped into several different pieces on the ocean floor. "I'm sorry," Mikey said softly, hardly aware he'd spoken. Jim cringed, his body hunkering down as he put a finger to his lips, begging for silence. But the words had been spoken. Slowly, as if in a rotating pedestal, the painter turned to face Jim, who now abandoned his hiding place with a shout of, "Run!" He sprinted towards Mikey. Jim was always fast. He was almost beside him before Mikey knew it. Mikey was beginning to turn when the painter's arms extended impossibly fast. The painter hadn't moved, only its arms had impossibly lengthened. The entire distance that Jim had covered, the painter's long fingers grasped Jim's entire head, gripping it like a spider seizing its prey. As the painter glided closer with a dripping brush, Mikey staggered in shock. He tried to yell, but his voice choked on the fear that was stuck in his throat. The painter held Jim in place, despite his kicking and screaming. Jim grabbed the long bony finger, twisting in their grip, but to no avail. The painter began to paint a long stroke up Jim's right leg and torso. More screaming as Jim struggled, his eyes bulged, straining wide with exertion. Each brushstroke began turning Jim Lunkin's flesh into paint itself. It dripped down to the floor as, drop by drop, Jim was painted out of existence. It saved his head for last, and when that was all that was left of him, when there were no lungs to scream from, the painter held it up and slowly painted out Jim's face, pressing the brush deep into eye sockets and working the brush into Jim's still chomping mouth with a cold indifference. When there was nothing but the tattered rags of Jim's clothes, it worked on them too, wringing them out until they turned to wet globs of paint, slipping through the inhuman hands, dripping to the ground. Mikey was frozen, condemned to watch the horror of Jim's death for a second time. His paralysis only ended when the painter turned his attention towards him. He fled, praying the long arm wouldn't reach him next. Mikey ran faster than he thought possible. His heart pounded furiously, fueled by the adrenaline of fear. His muscles screamed as he raced up the hill on Main Street, passing the black shops and houses to arrive at the Lighthouse Inn. This was the only building yet to retain some of its original character, the paint having stopped mid-stroke before the yawning entrance. The colors were a welcome relief as he stepped inside. Mikey found himself appreciating the well-worn crimson upholstery and the shabby red, beer-stained carpet in the way he wouldn't have believed possible until now. It stood out in stark relief to the world outside. The place was always well attended, though, and he felt he'd be sure to find someone here to explain what the hell was happening. Inside, though, it seemed abandoned. He tried to recall who he should be seeing, but sweating and panting still from his exertions, he couldn't bring any names to mind. Only old Bill, who could always be found seated on the table stool around the corner of the bar by the pool table. He was there so often, he was almost part of the furniture. Sure enough, Bill was sat in his usual spot, back to the wall, but no one else. "Bill!" Mikey shouted. Bill didn't seem at all concerned, but then Mikey remembered Bill never did. Bill had taught at some fancy university for years. Mikey reasoned such people developed a certain approach to life. "Jesus, Bill, what the hell's going on?" "Nothing anymore," Bill replied, lifting a pint in acknowledgement. "Nothing since the painters." "What do you mean?" Mikey said, looking around the empty bar. "What's happened? I don't understand." "Don't you?" Bill replied. No, I fucking well don't. You want answers? Bill dangled the question out, infuriatingly. Mike had talked to Bill more than a few times, normally towards the end of the night. Though he'd never said it out loud, Bill was the smartest person Mikey had ever talked to. He seemed to know a little about everything and a lot about the stuff of which most people knew nothing. Painters? Are you telling me there's more of them? Mikey asked, finding his breath had returned. I just escaped from one of those things near the harbor. It was so black, and its arm... Mikey choked, trying not to recall the encounter. What the hell are they? He asked, desperate for some kind of answer that would explain the madness away. I can spare you a couple minutes, I suppose. Bill continued. I don't know about anything with certainty, but I can talk about the possibilities of what they could be. First thing you might want to consider is, are we awake? Is this real? Perhaps this is just a terrible nightmare you're just about to wake up from. Look, I'm not dreaming any of this bullshit, Mikey answered. All right, so we can discount that if you're sure, Bill replied. Secondly, perhaps when you banged your head, you've been injured. All this is your dying brain running out of oxygen. Painters are some manifestation of guilt you were feeling, conjured up by your cerebral cortex. Maybe not quite a dream? Mike put his hand up to the lump on his head from where he had hit it in the doorway. It stung. He could feel the swelling and dried blood. No, that's not it, Bill. I'm here. This is real. Please, not another one of your how do you know what's real lectures. I'm far too fucking sober for that shit right now. Well, this is the third thing, said Bill. I promise you won't like it. Try me, Mikey replied, leaning over the bar and helping himself to a bottle of whiskey, swigging straight from the bottle. You're out of time, answered Bill. What do you mean? We just started talking. No, you're out of time. Time's moved on. You've been left behind or pulled from it. And where we are now, well, this space left in its wake. It's all the shadow of a moment past, Mikey, and the painters are obliterating it. And when their work is done here, there'll be nothing. No memory of you, no me, no nothing. Bullshit. Well, it's just a hypothesis, Bill replied with an easy smile. This is typical of you, Bill. Every time we talk, you always do this. It's messing my head. Mikey cried, burying his head into his hands. Every time we talk, this is what I do, right? Every time, man, Mikey answered. Well, that's the problem here, Mikey. You remember this place well, you spend a lot of time here. You always see me in the corner. Yeah, so what? Mikey answered. But a chill had begun to form down his spine, as some part of him already knew what Bill was going to say next. And you think I'm smart? Smartest man you ever met. Well, I never said. Mikey's voice began to fade. If I'm so smart, then why can't I remember what I had for breakfast this morning? Or where I live, where I grew up? Stop it, Bill. You already know the answer, Bill replied. I know I drank craft ale. I know I'm smart, but I don't know any details of my life. I don't know what the inside of my house looks like, or where I got married, or if I have children. I have no knowledge of my life at all. And you know why? Stop it, Bill, Mikey whined. You know, stop. Bill took a long swig of his drink before he put the glass back down. I'm just a memory, Mikey. I'm just your memory of Bill. No, Mikey shouted, backing away and shaking his head. You know it's true, Bill said. They're coming for you. They paint everything that ever was. People go fast. Buildings take longer. The more permanent something has, the longer it takes, but everything gets painted. Sooner or later, Mikey, everything gets painted black. Mikey didn't say anything. "You're out of time," said Bill. "So am I." He got off his stool and made towards the door. As he did, a monstrous black figure rose silently from behind the bar, its arm dripping with paint already extending. Mikey saw the brush smear across Bill's back. And again, Mikey ran. All he could think of was getting back to the safety of the boat. Running downhill was harder. More than once he almost lost his balance. He could see other painters now. Some watched on from the rooftops, others he glimpsed through the streets, gliding effortlessly. They matched his frantic pace as he made his approach to the harbor. He was so close now. It was only the laughter that stopped him. A child's laughter. A young girl ran into his path, almost colliding. She was tiny, no more than 3 years old, wearing a yellow hooded jacket. "You can't be here, honey. We're your folks," Mikey said, speaking as quickly as he could. "No, my dad," said the girl, pulling back her hood. Mikey stared straight into the face of the daughter he had only seen once. But Rose must be almost 10 by now. This couldn't be her. "I don't know, my dad." She said it again. The words hit him in the gut, just as he realized the yellow coat was what she was wearing the only time he'd ever seen her 6 years ago. He saw movement from the corner of his eye. The painters were looming within grabbing distance. Several of them now converged on him and Rose, their cowls dripping paint as they advanced. He grabbed the girl's hand to pull her with him, but his hand just passed through hers as if she wasn't quite there. He tried again frantically, and again. "I don't know, my dad," she said. She was saying it repeatedly now, staring through him as Mikey's face became a mask of dread and despair. The painters approached the last memory of his daughter like grotesque shadows, their brushes raised. She looked so small. She didn't have time to scream. Then there was only paint and darkness, and Mikey could remember her no longer. Mikey didn't remember making it back to the boat. Tears were falling from his eyes, but he didn't know why. He gunned the engine, heading for the mouth of the harbor and the promise of open sea. But with every yard, he sailed closer to escape. Another dark figure appeared, until hundreds of painters stood in silence, lining the harbor walls, watching and waiting. Mikey forced himself to look away, his eyes feral. His mind fought a losing battle to recollect anything at all, other than the bile of his own fear. The painter's work was almost done. They never rushed. They were always out of time. Standing shoulder to shoulder, they raised their buckets, and with perfect synchronization, began pouring the content into the ocean. The paint spewed forth without stopping. Endless millions of black gallons flowed until the water changed from hues of blue to an endless black. It spread out, pushing forward to make an entire sea of paint, where time and memory no longer existed. What had once been a man on a boat staring at the black waves. He looked down to see his translucent, skeletal fingers now held a dark, dripping brush. He would say nothing. He would paint. NostalgiaNet Forum. Television. Local.
Does anyone remember this kid's show? It was called, Candle Cove, and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found reference to it anywhere, so I think it was on a local station around 1971 or 72. I lived in Ironton at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember it was on at a weird time, like 4 p.m.
It seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland and was 9 years old in 72. Candle Cove. Was it about pirates? I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave talking to a little girl.
Yes! Okay, I'm not crazy. I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls, like real low budget. His head was an old porcelain baby doll, looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't remember what station this was. I don't think it was WTSF, though.
Sorry to resurrect this old thread, but I know exactly what show you mean, Skyshale. I think Candle Cove ran for only a couple of months in 71, not 72. I was 12 and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was channel 58, whatever station that was. My mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I remember. It took place in Candle Cove, and it was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called the Laughingstock, and Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily. And there was Calliope music constantly playing. Don't remember the girl's name, Janice or Jade or something. I think it was Janice.
Thank you, Jaren. Memories flooded back when you mentioned the Laughingstock in Channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like it was swallowing the sea, and it had that awful Ed Wynn voice and laugh. I especially remember how jarring it was when they switched from the wooden, like, plastic model to the foam puppet version of the head that talked.
I think I remember that too. Do you remember this part, Skyshale? You have to go inside.
Oh, Mike, I got a chill reading that. Yes, I remember. That's what the ship always told Percy when there was a spooky place he had to go in, like a cave or a dark room where the treasure was. And the camera would push in on Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside. With his two, like, eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw and the fishing line that opened and closed it. Oh my god, it just looks so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above like a really, really tall, narrow teeth.
I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about 5 when this show was on. Nightmare fuel.
That wasn't the villain, the puppet with the mustache. That was the villain's sidekick, Horace Horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on top of the mustache. I used to think that meant he only had one eye. But yeah, the villain was another marionette, the Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then.
Jesus H. Christ, the Skin Taker. What kind of a kid show were we watching? I seriously could not look at the screen when the Skin Taker showed up. He just descended out of nowhere on his strings, just a dirty skeleton wearing that brown top hat and cape, and his glass eyes that were too big for his skull. Christ almighty.
Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up like crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin?
Yeah, I think so. Remember, his mouth didn't open and close. His jaw just kind of slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why does your mouth move like that?" And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl but at the camera and said, "To grind your skin."
Oh, I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory, a bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended, the show faded in from black, and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces, and they were just like screaming, and the puppets and marionettes were flailing spastically and just like all screaming. The girl was just moaning and crying like she'd been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare. I used to wet the bed when I had it.
I don't think that was a dream. I remember that. I remember that was an episode.
No. No, not possible. There was no plot or anything. I mean, literally just standing in place crying and screaming for the whole show.
Maybe I'm manufacturing the memory because you said that, but I swear to God I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed.
Oh my god, yes. The little girl Janice, I remember seeing her shake, and the skin taker screaming through his gnashing teeth, his jaw careening so wildly I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off and that was the last time I ever watched it. I ran to tell my brother and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on.
Hey, I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was a little kid in the early 70s, when I was 8 or 9, if she remembered a kid's show, Candle Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that, and I asked why, and she said, because I used to think it was so strange that you said, I'm gonna go watch Candle Cove now, Mom. And then you would tune the TV to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show. The following was found in an envelope on a bus bound for Chicago. I'm writing this so that when the room is eventually opened, people will perhaps understand the things they find within, so that I'll no longer be thought of as the madman. Part of me already fears that I am. It all began with a reading of the will. My mother, my only living parent left, passed away due to a heart attack in her New England home. Her body had been found by one of the women who came to clean every few days, and the news had not come as a shock to any of the family. She'd had 2 previous heart attacks, and with her smoking and drinking, she wasn't exactly in the best of health. It had been a surprise that she wanted me to have the old family home, though I never exactly had much love for the place. I mean, I moved out in the first chance I got. Honestly, I hadn't been expecting to get anything in the will, given how long it had been since we'd even spoken. I was surprised she hadn't written me out, the way that she'd tried to write me out of the family's history by removing any picture of me from the house. Certainly didn't plan to keep the creepy, rundown old place. But at the same time, I knew that there was a chance I could fetch a bit of cash in the market if someone put a little work into it, fix it up. And as I was currently between jobs, it might be a worthwhile use of my time. So, I got my brother, a cousin, they all came over and they were helping fix it up. Which, they happily agreed to. There actually wasn't as much work to do as I'd first thought, as the house seemed to be in better repair than I remembered it being. I guess my mother, cheap as she was, had still finally been forced to actually get someone to fix up some of the bigger problems to the house. It was little stuff that needed repair, and a new coat of paint, but it only ended up taking about a week or so in the end. It was during that time that I first found it. I don't have the best memories of the old place, given how long it had been since I'd stayed there, but one of the first things I noticed while I was walking along the ground floor hallway was that there was a door that hadn't been there before. Stared at it for a few moments, more out of confusion than anything else, before trying to push it open. Wouldn't budge an inch. And asked my brother if he knew what might be down there, and he shook his head, saying that he'd not even noticed it before now. My cousin said that she'd noticed a big, old-fashioned looking key in the keyhole of the door the last time she'd come round to visit, but she had no clue where it might be right now. I shrugged, not really thinking much of it at the time, just figuring I'd have to get someone to bust the door down at some point before I got the house sold. Now, the room that none of us wanted to go in was Emerson's. It was weird, seeing all his old toys and coloring book still there, as if our mother had been trying to bring her son back by clinging onto the past. Emerson had always been our mother's favorite, the one who she'd lavished all of her attention on. I saw that she stuck his drawings up all over the place, drawings of pirate ships, odd, comical-looking figures with these strange designs. My brother told me that when he'd stayed for dinner, our mother would still set a place for Emerson, as if she expected him to just show up out of the blue. Missing for all these years, and she was still expecting him to come wandering through the door. The first night I spent alone in the house, I didn't sleep very well. Crazy as it sounds. I kept thinking that I heard noises in the house, people talking to each other. I must have checked each and every one of the rooms 12 times, only to find each and every one of them empty. I even checked to see if I'd left the TV on, but it was still unplugged. I'd go back to bed, and then, after a little while, the noises would start up again. Sometimes I was sure I could hear music as well. It's around 4 a.m. A thought occurred to me, and I went to the locked door in the hallway, pressing my ear against it and listening closely. I was sure I heard what sounded like a muffled tune coming from within. The next day I went into town to buy some food, and after the events of last night I also bought a hammer to knock that old door down. It was while chatting with the cashier that I learned something unsettling about the neighborhood that I'd temporarily moved into. I casually brought up where I was staying after he commented on me being new around here, and I told him I was planning to try and sell up. He let out a short burst of laughter before looking embarrassed about it, and when I asked him to explain, he said the following: "No one with sense is going to buy that dump. No one with half a brain would buy any house within 10 miles of that place," he said, not looking up from the groceries he had packed away. "Why not? Seems like a nice enough neighborhood," I replied. "Oh, because all them kids going missing, of course." He'd go on to explain that for the past few years, there had been a sudden and disturbing rise in the number of children vanishing from their homes in the area. There had been search parties formed. The police, the FBI, they got involved. But nothing turned up. The kids had vanished from their homes with no signs of forced entry or struggle, and no evidence left behind as to who might have been responsible. People were trying to move away as fast as possible, but there were few who would buy a house in the area once they heard about what was going on. No one wanted to move to a place where a child kidnapper or killer was active. I have to admit the story kind of creeped me out. Knowing that something so strange was going on near where I was staying made the odd going on of the previous night seem even more unsettling to me, and so as soon as I got home, I decided to bust that door down. And my neighbor, a fairly nice young woman named Charlie, who I'd gotten to know, was working on her home's front lawn when I got back and noticed the hammer in my hand as I headed towards that front door of my home. Not really wanting to be alone when I broke the door down, I gave her an abridged version of the events, leaving out the odd noises of last night, that is, and asked if she'd like to join me in finding out what was in the room. "Mysterious locked door. Very Scooby-Doo," she said as I grinned. "Sure, I'll be Fred, you be Daphne," I replied, happy to have someone with me. Her presence making the nervousness I had felt while listening to the cashier's story start to fade a little. Trust me, I'm more Velma than Daphne. Once inside the house, I packed away the various groceries, poured drinks for myself and Charlie, before we went to the white door. It only took a few swings from the hammer to smash it open, the lock breaking beneath the assault, and the door swinging open. Behind it was a staircase, leading down to a darkened basement below. I stared in confusion at the stairs, not believing what I was seeing. Our house didn't have a basement, I was sure of that, and yet, suddenly I seemed to recall seeing this before. could remember playing with Emerson one day, daring each other. Emerson had always been afraid of pretty much everything, and I, in the way of older brothers everywhere, had taken far too much pleasure in tormenting him. I was beginning to remember the two of us stood at the top of the staircase, me daring him to go down into the dark while calling him a chicken. "Come on, Emerson," I had said to him. "You have to go inside." Charlie and I began to descend the old creaking steps towards the basement, the hammer still clutched tight in my hands. I didn't know what we'd find, but I knew that I felt better being armed with something that could do some damage. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, Charlie began feeling around for a light switch, finding one after a few moments and flicking it on. The room was instantly illuminated, revealing what was inside. "Oh my God. Look at all this cool stuff," Charlie cried out. The basement was full of puppets. There were dozens of them, all lined up in various shelves, all in very good repair, as if they were brand new. There were puppets of all shapes and sizes, some of them being very human-like, while others were Muppet-like animal creatures. Others were more monstrous. There were props from what looked like the sets of kids' shows, I guess. None of it had any dust on it, as if someone had been down to tidy up just moments before. I could guess what all this was from, but what it was doing down here, I had no idea. "What is all this?" Charlie asked, as she picked up one of the puppets, a guy with a massive mustache and a monocle over one eye. She grinned, playing around with him, moving his limbs up and down. My brother used to work on a kids show years ago. Pirate Place or something, I think it was called. It only ran for a couple of years because it got canceled. I guess this stuff's all the old puppets and sets from the show, I said as we looked around the room. My eyes fell on a creepy-looking skeleton puppet with a really weird mouth and a top hat upon his head. Ugly-looking thing, I thought to myself at that moment. "No way. Do you have any idea how much some of this stuff might be worth? Collectors pay a fortune for things like this on eBay," Charlie said, setting the puppet down gently on one of the shelves. I glanced around at the rest of the contents of the room. Apart from the puppets and set pieces, there was an old sewing machine set on a desk that was otherwise completely bare. There was no sign of anything that could have been the source of the tune that I'd heard before. Deciding that I must have imagined it, probably due to lack of sleep and being back in the old place, I did my best to forget about my fears and concentrate on the opportunity before me now. There was just one thing that troubled me as I looked around. On the desk the sewing machine was set on, there were several odd red stains spattered over it. As I stared at them, I was sure, out of the corner of my eye, that the odd-looking skeleton puppet's head twitched in my direction. The next few days went by without anything odd happening, really. I put the puppets up on eBay, had a few people come to visit the house. The only thing that was strange was when one couple visited the basement. All the color drained out of the husband's face when his eyes fell on the skeleton puppet. He just turned, left the basement, and the house. He went to the car, started it up, and sat there until his wife joined him after apologizing for his rudeness, and the two of them just drove away. Later that night, I was sure that I heard the old sewing machine in the basement. I went down to check. At the same time, looking at the darkened doorway, I suddenly felt very frightened. And when there was a knock at the door, the sudden noise almost made me jump out of my skin. My head jerked to the side towards the source of the noise. Taking a moment to steady my nerves, I walked to the door, opening it cautiously, and I saw Charlie standing there. "We need to talk," she said. She said that she mentioned to a friend of hers about the find in the basement a few days ago. When she brought up the name Pirate Place, he'd gone quiet. and asked her to describe the puppets. He looked afraid, and she said, as if he'd seen a ghost. He told her to move house. Get away from me. And from those damn things, as he referred to the puppets. Growing increasingly hysterical as the conversation had gone on, he'd repeated over and over that it wasn't safe to be around them, that they could see you through them. He'd rambled at length about physical avatars and the signal, none of which had made any sense to her. Apparently, he used to work in television, and he had known my brother. He said that he'd sat down with Emerson in what he called the script room and then started raving about knowing where the stories came from. Charlie said that she'd never seen him like this before, that he seemed to almost be psychotic. His eyes bugged out of his head, his face glistening with sweat. She'd been worried that he was about to have some kind of attack. Was your brother involved in anything weird? She asked me. And I honestly didn't know how to respond to that. I mean, Emerson had always been an odd kid, no doubt about that, but I couldn't imagine him ever provoking such a frightened reaction in anyone, let alone a grown man. I asked her if he'd said why the puppets were so awful, and she shrugged. All the stuff he was saying wasn't making much sense. He just said, it's not the puppets, it's what made them. And then he got up and he said he couldn't be in my house anymore, just ran out to his car, drove off. I decided that as she'd shared her weirdness with me, maybe I could open up about some of the weirdness in my life right now. I explained about the odd noises. The music, the sewing machine seeming to turn itself on, and against my better judgment, we decided to descend into the pitch-black basement. Once again. I mean, I don't know what I expected to find. But I was sure that something would be wrong. So when we saw that nothing seemed to have changed or been moved, I don't know, I felt an odd sense of almost disappointment. Kind of wanted for there to be something strange down there, just to prove that I wasn't imagining all of this, to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. And that's when Charlie spotted the door. It was when she flicked off the light as we began to go up, casting one last look back into the darkness, and noticed that there was light coming from somewhere. Not very bright, but nonetheless a light source. Moving swiftly, we shoved aside one of the shelves of puppets and felt along the wall behind it to confirm what Charlie had believed to be the case. There was a door behind it. I told you this was all kinds of Scooby-Doo, Charlie said with a grin on her face, clearly enjoying herself. I smiled, which was something I definitely wouldn't have been able to do if she wasn't there. It was nice to have someone to share this insanity with. We went along the wall, trying to find some way to open the doors, some handle or switch to make it open. From behind it, I was sure that I could hear something. It sounded almost like music. Circus music? A cheerful, upbeat tune. But also off somehow, as if there was something not quite right about it. Out of the corner of my eye, I was sure that the puppet with the ridiculous mustache and monocle had moved, and I realized how ridiculous that sounds, but I was certain of it. It was just the tiniest movement, the twitch of its head towards the skeleton puppet as if waiting for orders. I thought to myself, and then I was wondering why that thought had even popped into my head. With a bit of work, we managed to strip away the wallpaper that was covering most of the door, revealing that it was bright red in color. The paint chipped and flaked in places with a small keyhole, no handle. I assumed that it just pushed inwards once unlocked, or perhaps slid to the side, as there was no place for a handle to have once been either. It was then that I noticed Charlie had stopped smiling. In fact, she was just staring at the door with what looked like a mix of confusion and fear, taking a few steps back from it. When I asked her what was wrong, she shook her head and made excuses to leave. I asked her if she was all right. She told me she was tired. Promised to help me try and find the key to the door in the morning. I mean, it was getting late, so it was plausible enough, but I knew that something was wrong here. For the rest of the evening, I looked through Emerson's old things in his room, looking for some clue perhaps as to what it was that had inspired such fear in Charlie's friend. For the most part, it was old toys, childhood drawings, nothing much of use. There were a few things that were odd, though. There's a picture that I guess Emerson had done when he was little. There was a crude drawing of a boy sat in his bed that I think was meant to be Emerson himself. Around him stood several figures. One was just a stick figure with a hat on its head. Another was a portly man with a cartoonish mustache and teeth. And there was a third that was very odd. It was just a scribble in the outline of a person. A black, shadowy scribble. It was a circle drawn above the three figures, and the boy and lines were shown coming down from it, leading to the boy's head. For some reason, looking at those lines, the words tendrils came to mind. There was a picture of a red door. The words, "Where they take them," was scrawled in large letters beneath it. And the final picture was of the stick man and the man with the mustache leading several smaller figures towards a third. Now, this one was a woman, whether a rather well-drawn one in comparison to the crude, basic nature of the others, except for the face. The face was just 2 dots for eyes and a line for a mouth. The words, "Where they take them," was written here as well. There was a message on my answering machine from Charlie the next day. She said she'd gone to stay with her girlfriend for a few days, just to clear her head, and apologized for leaving so suddenly the previous night. Her voice sounded odd. Kind of shaky, really. And she said not to bother with the door. She tried to sound calm and casual when she said it, but there was fear in her voice. She said it was probably best to forget about the whole thing and just cover up the basement. Not even mention it to the potential buyers of the house. She said it'd be a good idea to take the puppets off of eBay as well. I really should have done as she asked. Instead, I spent the rest of the day ransacking the house, searching for the key to that door. I looked everywhere with little success until, almost on a whim, I decided to search Emerson's room more thoroughly. And there, hidden in one of his old pillowcases, was a key. I poured myself a drink to steady my nerves, sitting down to watch the TV. I remember the old thing never picked up much when we were little. Channels were always full of static. Seemed to be working better now, at least, and then the news came on talking about another disappearance in the area. A girl of 12 this time vanished from her home in the middle of the night. I flipped through the channels, looking for something a little less grim while I finished my drink. Getting up, I headed down the steps into the basement, striding towards the door, ready to open it. The skeleton puppet was sat at the sewing machine now. I knew I hadn't moved it, and neither had Charlie and the other puppets. Their heads seemed to be turned towards it, as if they were waiting for it to do something, to say something. I mean, God, it was a hideous thing. Had an awful, misshapen mouth, looking awful. God knows why the prop designer had made it look like that. At that moment, the words to grind your skin popped into my head. I put the key into the door, and sure enough, it unlocked it. The door pushing inward with ease, revealing the room that lay beyond it. It was illuminated by a single dirty bulb, making the contents of the room easy to see. Dear Lord, the smell. The only thing worse was the sight of what was littered around the room. Children's shoes and clothes, some spattered with old, dried blood, were piled in a heap in one corner of the room. The floorboards were stained with large patches of red, one of which, as I stepped into it, I realized was still somewhat fresh, sticky, like soda spilled on a movie theater floor. The room smelt of spoiled meat, burnt hair, and it took all I had not to throw up as I entered it, wondering how the smell hadn't traveled from this room to the basement. There was a pile of old video cassettes in one corner of the room, all labeled with things like Emerson's first bike ride and Emerson's first spelling bee. All old home movies, I guessed. But mixed in with some of them were tapes labeled Candle Cove, Episode 4, and Season 3 pilot episode. I picked up a few and noticed that there were bloody fingerprints on several. There was a series of steps leading down further into the blackness at the rear of the room, and I felt oddly compelled to go down there. How far down did this go? How was this even here beneath my family home without me ever knowing it? And yet, I felt like I did know about it. Looking at those steps, I felt like I remembered being in this room before. I was a child, and it had been empty then, and there I stood, with Emerson, at the foot of those stairs. Emerson, you have to go inside, I'd whispered to him, taking delight in how terrified he looked. He had gone down into the dark, and my head throbbed with pain. It actually physically hurt to try and remember, as if something was willing me not to. Had there been someone down there with us? I was sure I remembered there being someone in the room besides the two of us. The more I thought about it, our mother? No, not our mother, but another woman. Why couldn't I remember her face? I began to take unsteady steps down the stairs. The more I walked, the closer I got to another door, another red door. The key fit the lock of this one as well, and it opened with ease. There was music coming from within now, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. I felt it pulling me towards it, calling me like a siren song. I had to go inside, I thought to myself. I had to go inside. I wasn't alone in this room. I burned all the puppets later that night, not that I imagined it matters. They'd been destroyed before, and it hadn't stopped them from coming back. They're just wood and paint and cloth, nothing but a conduit. They allowed them to come through. Allowed them to walk through the door and come here, and oh God. The door. I know where they go now. I know where they go. Oh, cry out, Jesus, please. I know where they go. I saw it. They took me there. The way they took my brother when he was a child. They need us. I don't know why they need us, but they need us. And that's what he said. Through that horrible, misshapen mouth, those eyes rolling in his sockets wildly. They needed my brother, and they needed me, and my And my family isn't safe. The signal needs us. The story needs us. The ship came to the cave. Emerson was laughing and crying at the same time as he spoke the words I knew were coming. As he told me what I had to do, it was waiting for me. I saw that... I ran. You may think me a coward for not helping them, not even trying to save them, but I know where the ship is taking them now. I know where the voyage leads. I know who's waiting at the end. I pray to God, but I know that it'll do no good. I know now. I know things that no one should ever know. I know that Emerson learned that day the signal found him. I know what Emerson learned the day the signal found him. I know the things he learned in that dark place where the music comes from. Music played on instruments crafted of bone and organs wrapped in flesh. It's always there, now in my head, playing in an endless loop. The signals found me like it found Emerson that day I made him go down those stairs. Like it found our mother. I know why she did what she did. I know what she knew, and I know where Emerson is. I saw him. I saw him on the ship. My God, the ship. The laughing was the worst. I wish it would stop laughing. I sealed up the basement, but I know that one day someone will go down there again. I wrote this so that when they discover the things I know, find down there, they'll know neither I nor my mother were responsible, perhaps, so they'll have the courage to do what I don't. And they can destroy this terrible place. They can burn it to the ground. The only thing holding me back is the fear that perhaps this place is not merely the door to their cage, but the cage itself. I mean, if the house were to be destroyed, perhaps they'd be able to spread. I want to apologize to my family. I hope they'll forgive me for what I'm about to do. I hope they'll be able to understand. And my brother, if this reaches you, please don't go into that house and don't sell it, board it up, let it stand forgotten. A creepy old building for people to stare and wonder at. Maybe that'll hold them back at least. The sewing machine's going in all hours of the day now. I know it's him. Sewing himself new additions to that terrible cape. She lets me keep the skin, you see. He gets to keep the skin. I'm so sorry, Emerson. I don't hate you for the things you did. I wish I could help you or at least put you out of your misery. I know they won't let you rest. I know you can't be free of them now, and I see them out of the corner of my eyes sometimes. They're gonna take me to the ship. I won't let them. I'll die the way I choose. Seek and carry my body away. Wonderful. Hopeful. Far from where they can ever find it. This letter was found lying beside a VHS tape. The tape proved to be nothing but static, although those who watched it reportedly felt a sense of unease and nausea when they tried to view it. The Grimes home was searched, and the belongings of over 23 children who had gone missing in the local area were discovered within. No trace of the children themselves were found within the house or near it, however. The basement and the secret room were both as the letter described them. However, there were no stairs leading down to a further sub-basement or anywhere on the property. The puppets all also appeared to be completely undamaged, despite the claim that they had been burnt. The tapes mentioned in the letter were missing. 2 families have since lived in the Grimes home. Neither stayed for more than a few months, reporting strange smells, odd noises around the house, and things going missing. One reported sensing something terrible in the basement, and her children spoke of horrible dreams about a ship that would be taking them away, and the bony man from the TV watching them at night. The house is now abandoned, having been purchased and then left empty by one Adrian Grimes in early 2011. The puppets and set pieces of Candle Cove, mistakenly named Pirate Place by Grimes in the letter, an early working title for the show that Emerson Grimes later abandoned, supposedly vanished shortly before Adrian Grimes made the purchase. The whereabouts of Jason Grimes remain unknown. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or by listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I know I haven't had as many updates as I would like to have on the channel lately, and things just kind of get really hard with shit that's happening in my family. But hey, I wanted to say thank you so much for being around, thank you so much for still supporting me and for coming back to listen to new stories. If you guys want to get updates anytime that I do upload, then please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Or if you're listening over a podcast, I think it's still a subscribe button or a follow button or whatever happen. Those happen to be. As always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody out there on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. A very, very big thank you to everybody there, and to especially Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, King Crab, Calcifer420, Veronica Lynn Lopez, Marlon Chavez, Azazel66603, Ethan Leon, Polaris Prospect X, Blake Rattler, Viceroy Scorn, Samara Lynn, Disciple, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna Crow, LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jedis Pet, Clonable, J Kearns, Mike, himbojerry, CrusaderChocobo, Remember the Sun, Estebean, Hour Minute Second Time, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Voice of Sand, Phycomel, Melted Lake, Tully Sue, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Tommy Walters, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Tristan Pelton, Ball Arms the Rat, The Ginger Bros, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kinchin. To all of you guys there, everybody who's down in the description, and everybody who can just give $1, I want to say thank you to you guys. And if you would like to join this list in the description, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepy. And if you would like to join this list in the description, sweet dreams.